But welcome everybody to the All Raised Seed Bootcamp. We're so excited to have you here. And I'm Felicia. I'm the co-founder CEO of Binti. And I'm also one of the co-leads on the All Raised Seed Bootcamp. And we're gonna do a whole intro of our panel. But first, I just wanna give a really quick background on All Raised so that everyone has a little bit of background of where this bootcamp came to be from. So All Raised was actually started by a group of about 30 women VCs a couple of years ago, and their goal was to increase the number of female VCs and female founders because the percentage is very low, and so the goal was to dramatically increase that. And they started with a few initiatives really focused on VCs and helping women VCs raise from LPs and helping more women get into VCs in the first place. They also had a initiative called Female Founder Office Hours that was women VCs giving advice to women founders raising their seed round, and they would have in-person events doing these office hours. At the same time, being a female founder, I was sort of like giving advice to other women raising seed rounds, and actually had a similar idea of getting like a group of women founders together to form a group to give advice to women founders. And it was actually before they launched Female Founder Office Hours. And I bought the domain name femalefounderofficehours.com and like formed a group of about 100 women founders to do this. And then All Raised launched Female Founder Office Hours, and I was like, oh my gosh, they took my name. And then I actually reached out to them asking if they wanted the domain, and they said, why don't we just merge our groups? And so that's what we did. And so that's how a group of basically female founders came together with the group of women VCs. And Female Founder Office Hours V2 became women VCs and women founders giving advice to women founders to raise their seed round. And over the last year, we've done about 1,000 office hours. We have 200 mentors that have all raised seed rounds. A lot of them have raised even later rounds as well. Collectively, among the 200 mentors, we've raised over $4 billion. And so we've had 1,000 office hours with women, and we got really good feedback. But we also heard that people need more help than just 1 hour of advice to be able to go and raise a seed round. And people had a lot more questions in addition to that hour. And we also heard from the mentors that they were kind of saying the same spiel every time of just like, here's how to run a process, here's how to make a pitch deck. And it was a little repetitive for them, and it wasn't the best use of their time. And so that's actually where the idea for the bootcamp came from, where we said, well, maybe there's just like some foundational knowledge of raising a seed round that we can give in sort of a curriculum format to everybody. And then at the end of that, you can get an office hour, and it could be a lot more targeted, and you can like ask your specific questions and do a pitch practice with already like some of the basics. And we did a trial bootcamp in June in person for about 40 women. And that was sort of our first guinea pig group. And that seemed to go well. We got good feedback. And now you guys are our guinea pig virtual group because we want to reach more women, and we also want to reach women that are not all in San Francisco. And so really our goal here is to give you the fundamentals of how to raise a seed round, and just give all of the knowledge from women that have raised a seed round, women that invest in seed rounds, of just like, the fundamentals. And so basically you've been getting the emails. So there's a guide that we wrote that has like, it's like a curriculum of like the different sections. And there's a section that goes along with each week. And then you also have the video of the first boot camp that you can watch, and which I sent to you before this. So the plan is like, read the curriculum, watch the first video, join this. You'll also get a recording of this in case you want to rewatch it, or if there's one you have to miss. And then at the end, you're going to be matched with a mentor to do a pitch practice. And so also keep your eyes out. We're actually going to send out an email asking when you plan to raise, because we're going to prioritize women that are raising sooner to match you with a mentor first. And then if you're not raising, maybe we'll match you in a few months. Okay, so that's kind of the orientation background that I wanted to give. So I wanted to kick off with our panelists introducing themselves. And so the things that I thought would be great to use as an introduction are, your name, your company or your fund, and what, if it's a company, what your company does, and then also the stage of company, how much money you've raised, how many employees you have. So I can kick it off to give a little bit of a example. So I'm Felicia Kikura. I'm the co-founder CEO of Binti, and we build software for the government to improve the foster care system. We are a Series A company. We've raised $14 million, and we're 34 people. Robin, do you want to go next? I'll kind of go down the order that I'm seeing people.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Robin. I'm the CEO and founder of Her, and Her helps lesbian, bisexual, and queer people meet each other and their community. We only ever raised a seed stage of funding, and we're a profitable business, so haven't raised beyond that. And we're a team of 12.
Awesome, thank you. Zara, do you want to go?
Sure. My name is Zara Kassam. I'm the founder and CEO of Monty Kids. We bring education to the home for babies from birth to 3, which is before kids start preschool, but when 85% of the brain is formed. So we're a direct-to-consumer. We have physical product and software for parents. We are a seed stage company. We've raised $6 million, and we have 18 employees.
Awesome. KJ, do you want to go?
Hi guys, I'm KJ Miller. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Minted Cosmetics. Minted is a pigment-first beauty brand celebrating women of all hues. We are a seed stage company. We've raised a little over $4 million to date, and we are a company of 9 people.
Awesome. And then Anne.
Just took a bite.
I know, sorry.
Hey guys, my name is Anne Murico. I am a co-founding partner of Floodgate, which is a very early stage venture capital firm. So we usually invest in seed or A rounds of companies.
Awesome. And Anne was the seed investor in Lyft, which recently IPO'd. So congratulations, Anne.
Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, great. So today's topics are focused on how to know when you should raise money, if you should raise money, what type of funding to go for, how to know if your company has product market fit and how to find it more quickly, how to communicate traction to investors, and then also how to size your market. The next sessions are going to focus on how to run a seed process, how to get introductions to investors, how to make a pitch deck, how to write an investor blurb, how to manage the emotional roller coaster of a fundraise, and how to decide if you want to announce your round. I think those are some of the main topics. So kicking us off, let's dig into how can a founder decide what type of financing is right for their business, and if you're a founder, also share how you decided how and when to finance your business. Should I?
I can jump in.
Cool.
So how and when to finance your business. So I'll speak for Minted. We knew before we even launched that eventually we were going to raise venture capital. And the reason we knew that was because the scale of the business that we wanted to build was a global multi-million-dollar business. And to build a consumer products company at that scale takes a lot of capital. So you can either just have that capital, right, if you're Kylie Jenner, or you can raise that capital. What you typically can't do is get the amount of capital that you would need for the scale of business we were trying to build from like a small business loan. That's something you can do if you're opening a single store or, you know, a restaurant or something that's more of a lifestyle business. It's not something that's super available if you need the sort of capital to build a scalable business. So for us, we knew sort of straight out the gate that we were going to eventually have to raise venture capital. That said, when we got started, we were making our products ourselves in our kitchen and spending our own money, not only to make the products, but also to then send the product out. So even though we knew we wanted to raise capital, it's not as if as soon as we had the idea, we went out there and started pitching, which is something some people do. You know, from the moment they have the idea, they decide, let me raise the money first before I spend any of my own dollars on this. And I don't, you know, I have nothing but respect for those people. Like, if you cannot spend any of your own money, even better. But I personally felt like, and I think my co-founder as well, felt like we needed to know that there was real demand here. And how could we know that if we didn't have a product, if we weren't sending it out, if we weren't testing it? How could we feel confident sitting in front of investors asking them for millions of dollars if we didn't have any demand to show? Mm-hmm. We spent our money first, but always knowing that we eventually were going to raise around.
That makes a lot of sense. So how did you feel like you were far enough to then go and raise money? Like, what was the point, and like, what milestone do you feel like you needed to get to, or?
Excuse me. So I can't say that we had a particular number in mind. It wasn't like, or a date in mind. It was more once we felt really confident that there was real demand for our product. So for us, we launched with lipstick, a collection of new lipsticks that we had actually handmade, and we were sending lipsticks out to influencers every single weekend. So I think by the time we had heard from, you know, over 100 influencers, and then of course our friends and family who we were testing the product on, and we knew not only do these influencers really like these products, but their followers do too. We had amassed something like a couple thousand followers on Instagram, a couple thousand people on our Instagram list. There was enough demand out there, and we, you know, considered those couple thousand people to be enough. Some people's bar might be much higher. Some people's bar might be much lower. But for us, a couple thousand people felt like there's real demand here. Let's go out and raise.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for sharing.
I can go. You know, from a venture investor's perspective, the way I would think about it is aligning your incentives with your venture investor's perspective. And there are the beauty of the landscape today is that you have everyone from angel investors who have very different incentives to, you know, SoftBank that has a $45 billion fund. And a lot of times the way I couch it is I tell people that you can know almost everything about a fund's perspective based on their fund size. And the reason is there's pretty simple mathematics, right? So we have, you know, $130 million fund. So let's round down to $100 million fund to make the math easy. Basically, a top tier investor will return $300 to $400 million back to their investors. That means that if I own aggressively 10% of your company at exit, then I need to have $3 to $5 billion worth of market cap in my portfolio to do that for my investors, right? And so that's my incentive mechanisms. Like I'm trying to create $3 to $5 billion of market cap with my portfolio. And the question that you need to be asking yourself is, as you're seeking investment from me, is whether or not you can make a dent in that $3 to $5 billion of market cap that I'm trying to create. And so work backwards. Just say, okay, to create, let's say, $1 billion or $5 billion business, what does my business need to look like? How much revenue do I need to generate? Do I actually believe that I can do that? And by going through that exercise, you can see if you're fully aligned. You know, we have companies that have been acquired for $100 million, and the founders did really great for themselves. And they're a little bit shocked that the investors are kind of unhappy with the exit. And my point is, you shouldn't be shocked. You should be totally sympathetic to the fact that it didn't make a dent in the things that we're trying to do. And and then again, have sympathy for the investor's perspective, because it's not that, our investors are actually endowments for universities. They're pension funds. So pension funds are representing firefighters or teachers. So this is not just a bunch of wealthy people and their money, but we're talking retirement funds, educational scholarships. That's what we're representing. And so if we don't get that return, we basically burn those dollars. And so that's the reason that we feel very passionately that we need to provide the returns that we promise to our limited partners. But that's our incentive mechanism. And when you go out to raise venture investment, you need to think through who is the investor that's taking a piece of your company, and are you aligned with their interests?
That's so valuable.
Sorry, Felicia, can I just jump in on that?
Yeah.
I don't know if that's allowed. I don't know what the format is.
Yeah, this is a conversation.
So I guess what I would say in response to Anne, just as a founder, is, and I assume a lot of the people on the call are founders, is you want to be aligned with your investor. You want to look for investors who are excited, obviously, about what you're doing and who are aligned with you. But you and your investor do have different goals and different incentives. And I think it's important to recognize what Anne said, which is very true, which is when you're going out and pitching these guys, if someone does have a $100 million fund, you do need to understand the return they're trying to get to. And I would say you need to make sure your pitch, if you're going to pitch those guys, is relevant to the return they're trying to get to. But I'm not going to go as far as and say you should feel bad if you don't get a return that's as great for them as it is for you, right? Because you, as a founder, have to be thinking about what makes sense for yourself first, I personally believe, and then also make sure that yourself, your team, your, and your investors. So I'm not trying to say that I inherently disagree, but I do think once you get in the game of raising money, you will really start to understand that, yes, you and your investors are partners, but you're partners with different incentives. That at least has been my experience and the experience I have heard from a lot of my founder friends. And I think sometimes investors can do a better job of taking founders along the journey with them to help them understand why I'm trying to put you towards this exit versus this exit. I don't know that investors always do that great of a job of it. And that might be something that you do a really great job of with your founders, is really helping them understand the journey from your perspective. But without that understanding, it can sort of start to feel like I'm being pushed in a certain direction by an investor, and I don't understand that. And I would just encourage any founders on the call to understand mechanically when you're pitching these guys, all of these numbers that are important to them, but that doesn't mean you're signing some sort of blood oath to get there. That's my perspective.
I would totally agree with that, but I'm just saying, don't be surprised, right? So if you're going to raise venture capital dollars, that's what you're signing up for. I'm going to press you to basically leave it all on the table and go for bust, because that's my incentive.
Right.
And if you're not ready to sign up for that, then and you don't want that pressure, you shouldn't be signing up for venture capital dollars, because that's our incentives. We don't, our incentives are, our portfolio is either really boom or it barely made a dent. It really is just like one of the two. And so if you're barely making a dent, then quite honestly, that's like, from our perspective, do we spend time on those companies? Right? That's one question that people ask. And then the other thing is, how much do we continue to push, right? So if you want that $150 million exit, then I would say take money from the angel investors who are really excited about that exit, because your board meetings will be totally unpleasant. And the way in which you're operating your business, you'll have significant disagreements with your investors. And why do that when there is such an abundance of capital where you can actually get aligned incentives? And this is assuming there is, like, you have all the choices in the world. And I totally understand from Cage's perspective, like if you only have one investor, like sell them the bag of goods and get them to sign that term sheet, right? But if you have the abundance of choice, then make sure that you have the right people who believe the things that you believe, so that you aren't pulled in this weird direction that may actually really be bad for your business. That's my main point.
Yeah, I think this is so valuable. I'm so happy that we just like dressed this head on in the first few minutes, because I think so many people like don't understand this going in. So I really appreciate you both sharing what you shared, because it's so important. And I think a lot of founders just like pitch the business and they don't realize kind of where the investor's coming from. And it's helpful to know that. I think we'll get into this a little bit when we talk about marketizing, which is actually later, but this feeds into that, because if your market size isn't large enough to hit the numbers that Anne was saying, then it probably doesn't make sense to raise from VC, but we can get more into that when we get to market sizing in a little bit.
There's also, can I jump in a little bit?
Yeah, jump in.
So there's also like different flavors of investors. There's impact investors in venture capital that care about the returns that Emery is talking about, but also want to see that you're making impact if that's what you set out to do. So knowing who you're talking to, really digging into their website, getting to know them, their other investments that they've made, and what they're interested in and expecting from you is really important. And then there's strategic investors who maybe, like a corporation that has an investing arm that is going to be maybe a little more patient, because they're not trying to return money to their LPs right away, and maybe looking at you as like a future acquisition. And so there are different flavors of investors.
Yeah, and do you want to, while you're going, do you want to share how you decided when to raise and what type of capital to raise?
Sure. So we also have, a direct-to-consumer business with a physical product. So we had to raise in order to do our first manufacturing run. I raised our seed kind of on an idea, because we make wooden toys for babies, and that's not something that we could do without enough capital to do a full manufacturing run. So we designed we have a curriculum for babies. We designed the product, built it out enough, invested our own money, my own money as a solo founder. And then, like KJ said, generated enough demand just through like our collecting emails and getting feedback from parents on the idea, to then go and talk to investors and paint a big vision. At this point in the seed raise, they're buying that vision, since you don't have necessarily a lot of traction. So that was really what we led with. And we do have a mix of pure venture capitalists, angel investors, impact investors, and strategics. And that is helpful because we've gotten to know kind of all of their incentives, and we're also, to start with, we didn't necessarily know where we fit best. And that has helped us figure it out.
Awesome. Robin, do you want to share your decision of when to raise money, and then when you decided not to raise and go profitable?
It's like, it was really helpful, like listening to what Anne says, like it's stuff that I feel I now know, and was definitely stuff that I did not know when I first started this. I think I was probably a good example of someone who didn't know what the hell they were doing, and it was just like, either I'd been like reading TechCrunch too much, or I just thought like, this is what happens. You make a startup and people give you money, because like clearly there is like money in this industry, and therefore people will want to invest in this business. And that kind of mindset of like, for me at the time, Grindr existed, and probably when we started, they were doing like 20 or $30 million of revenue per year. And I was like, how can anyone not want to invest in a business that is doing that? and with time have just learned that like venture funds do not want to invest in a business that is doing that, and that is all they're going to do for the foreseeable like 10 years. And so I think like when I raised money, it was because I didn't have any money. I had like saved up a bootstrap fund, and that was running out. I was working in a pub and was like, oh shit. And I was just too bullish to like give up. I was like, this is surely what's going to happen. And so was like, okay, I'll go and just fundraise, and just started asking as many people for advice and got on the train of doing it. And then I think I didn't really have a strategy. It was like, whoever will give me money, I will take it. And I think in that process, there were some people that I got this feeling that I shouldn't take money from them, who were some, I'd probably like to note it's just like old school investors. Like they had really different expectations of the kind of relationship we should have, the kind of rights they should have, like the information they should have access to. And although I didn't know it at the time, I just had this like gut feeling that something wasn't quite right about it. And so I said no to them. But I took money from so many weird places. Like I applied for a shit ton of grants, like did so many weird programs just to get like 5K here, pitch competitions to get a couple of grand there. And all of it is good practice, right? Because you're getting that feedback of like what resonates with people, what doesn't. We did one accelerator program in London. We then raised from like 3 investors after that. That took us to the next bit. Then we got into Y Combinator. We did a round after that. So, and you know, along the way, I took other money in between from other weird programs and funds that I just came across and applied for everything. So for me, it was just like gathering cash as I could to get to that point where I could be like, cool, the metrics are high enough that I'm going to get a larger piece of money that can like take us forward for the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And then how did you decide to go profitable and not, you know, instead of like, you know, continuing to raise like Series A, B and beyond?
We became profitable. And the goal was, so we had like, it was almost like a branch in our like decision for the future of the business. And one was to just like keep pushing with no revenue and get as big as we could. And the other was to monetize, get to profitability, and then look at raising after that. And it was at a time where like a bunch of big social apps had folded, like Secret, and like, you know, that had these big booms and then busts. And I was like, to get the metrics to raise a Series A for a social network company is so big and risky. I don't know if we can do that with the runway that we have. And so we took the revenue route because it was just a clearer path. And I kind of felt like it gave me the power to make those decisions in the future. And then I think since we became profitable, for what we're doing as a business, there's like a bigger vision and a bigger route, which like extends beyond just what Her does as a product. But I wasn't ready to stop working on what Her does as a product. And I still felt like there was shit that we had to sort out with Her before we like opened up our focus into other channels. And so the fact that we could just keep growing healthily ourselves felt like, because in the future we may raise more money as we like go to expand out into other services, but while we're still just focusing on queer women and with this product, like we shouldn't take more money to grow that, because we know the size of the market and what that is, and that's not something a venture fund is going to be interested in for a Series A. But as we expand further out, maybe it would be when the time is right for that.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I think it's so important to share too, because it really goes along with like what Anne was saying too, is that not every company should be a venture-backed business. Like you might have an idea for a company and you can just bootstrap it and make it profitable, and that might be like perfect for what you're trying to do. Or you might just raise an angel round and then get profitable and then one day have an exit and like they'll be very happy. So I think it's really important to be really thoughtful about this, because as Anne was saying, like if you kind of just go the venture route, but your incentives are not aligned, you're just both going to be like unhappy and there's going to be friction. So really appreciate this conversation. I've been tracking the Q&A and the comments, and someone said, thank goodness Anne is being so real. So thank you for the comment. I can briefly talk about like my journey and how I decided to raise and whatnot. I raised an initial pre-seed round. Before launch, I raised like a few $100K from angels, and just like with a pitch deck and idea. And then I got a little bit of traction Not very much. I think we were at like 2,000 a month in revenue. Um, and then I raised a $2 million seed round led by like a VC fund. Then I actually like pivoted the company pretty significantly and ended up doing like 1.5 million of like a bridge round on a safe note. And then I raised a Series A of $10 million a few months ago. So that was my path. And the reason that I did that, because I definitely considered like, you know, I wanted to take a step back and think like, what is the best path? But there, you know, for me there, it is like a big opportunity. I wanted to move fast. There were things that I wanted to be able to do that I wouldn't be able to do. We actually were cash flow break even before my A. So I did have the opportunity to be like, all right, I'm just going to be profitable. But there was so much that we wanted to do that we wouldn't be able to do without money. And it was like, like the only thing stopping us is if we had this money, we could like move so much faster. And so that was like the motivation for doing that. But another like real consideration that I want to chime in with and like get other people's thoughts is like control too of the company, and like, you know, the type of money that you raise really impacts your control of the company. So typically at a seed round, you don't give up a board seat. But typically at the A round, you give up one, and at the B you give, and at the C, basically like each round after that. And so at some point you will lose board control of your company, which basically lets them make all kinds of decisions, including firing you potentially, or, you know, deciding to sell the company, or just like a bunch of different things. And so that is something that some founders are like, that's okay. Like, as long as I'm doing a great job, like we'll be aligned. Other founders, that really scares them, and like they care a lot about autonomy. So I think that is something to really take into consideration of like what's important to you. And is it like going for the home run and it's okay if you have a smaller piece and you give up some control, or do you kind of like want autonomy and you're okay maybe moving a little bit slower and not raising as much in order to like keep that?
I also think that reality is way more, like, I just noticing where everyone's coming from, like a bunch of people posting from Europe, and like the reality of that is super different depending on what country you're in. Like the options you have are very different. Like when I was raising in London, like people were not comfortable with notes and safes they just thought were a joke. Like no one's going to sign that like flippant piece of paper. And so the terms that we have with our earlier investors, like they actually have information rights, and they one has a voting right, and that was, you know, for like £75,000, and he, you know, has tons of access stuff. And that was just the reality of what it's like raising in France and England versus what it's like being in San Francisco, and the different kind of options that you get here.
You know, one other, I'm just watching the perspectives here. Someone was asking what happens if the incentives aren't aligned. Mm-hmm. I'll give you one anecdote. I was, one of our companies was being sold, and none of the investors were particularly happy about the outcome, but we wanted to be supportive of the founders. And one of the investors at some point we were all relatively unhappy about one of the terms that was being presented. And to be totally honest, the founders really want to sell. We kind of don't care either way because it doesn't really make a difference in our fund. Well, at that point, the incentives for us to blow up the deal, right, are equal to actually making it happen. And so from the board's perspective, they're like, well, you know, if they don't take this term, like, we don't really care, because then the entire deal gets blown up, and then we're back to where we actually want to be of continuing to build a company. And I find that to be like a really bad separation of incentives, right? Like, if the founders want to sell, I should want to sell. And I find that to be a huge problem. I love actually when companies try to go profitable, because to me, that is the ultimate, like, middle finger to the investors, and like it gives you all of the capabilities of making all of the decisions. But the point at which like founders need capital to keep going and yet are not aligned in incentives with the investors, that's where the problems all happen. In terms of structure for investment, convertible notes, I really don't like them. I feel like it doesn't clarify what kind of dilutions the founders will go through. I was just talking to a founder who thought he was raising at a $30 million pre-raising $6 million, but found that actually he's raising at a $46 million post. And it's because he has a stack of convertible notes. And so I'm a big fan of companies selling the amount of the company that they think that they're selling, and founders knowing what they've done. And so that's the way I operate, and believe strongly that, you know, you should have full control over what's happening within your company.
That makes sense. And on that topic, actually, Anne, would you mind giving people kind of like a few minute overview of like what a convertible note, safe versus priced round, like what they are, and like, you know, a little bit of thoughts of the pros and cons?
Yeah, so convertible notes, I mean, they come in a lot of different shapes and sizes now. So basically, the stated belief is that there's no difference between a convertible note with a cap and a priced round. It's just faster, it's easier to document, and so that's the reason you should do it. The truth of the matter is that a convertible note is really just a debt instrument. And so sometimes it's actually structured that even if the company exits before the next round of financing, then the founder actually is able to just pay it back like it's a loan and not like it's an investment. So from an investor's perspective, you kind of have to protect yourself on that level. From a founder's perspective, the way it can kind of go sideways is if you raise at a much higher cap, a much higher valuation than your original cap, then essentially what you're having to do is you're generating more shares to make up for the difference between your cap and your current valuation. And it creates this weird structure where your incentives aren't fully aligned, because there's sort of a preference stack difference between the amount of dollars that people actually put in and what's sort of stated that they were put in. So it's a little bit complicated. You actually have to model it out. But it actually ends up inflating the post-money valuation in a way that was unanticipated. And so when a new round of financing comes in, you think that you're at a certain pre-money valuation, but then when you add in all of the shares that came in from your convertible note, all of a sudden that post-money valuation is really inflated. Everyone's diluted in a direction that they didn't intend to be. And so the communication can get really mixed up. So the thing that I always encourage our founders to do is to model it out. So if you're raising at a $10 to $15 million post-money or pre-money capped note, then try to figure out what happens when you raise at a 20 or 30 or $40 million valuation, so you can actually really figure out what you're selling to your next round investor. Oftentimes it's sort of at this last minute moment that everyone's trying to rewrite the documents, and that's why investors, founders who've gotten to that point oftentimes really start to dislike the convertible note. It's not just selling equity into the company.
Thanks for sharing that. I think that's a really good point about it being a little bit tricky to measure like what dilution you've had if you're doing a bunch of convertible notes. I think curious to get the founders' thoughts on convertible note versus price round. I think it is like pretty standard that Series A and beyond, you'll do a price round. Like that's pretty just how it works. I think seed, sometimes it's a priced round, particularly if it's a bigger fund. but with angels and stuff, it's usually not. It's usually you just do a convertible note or a safe. And I know that like for me, it's just a lot easier. It's like it's also easier to do on a rolling basis. Like you can just have a safe note, and you can have one of us, or kind of like what Robin was saying, she was like collecting money here and there. Like it's easier to do it on a more rolling basis. If you have a safe note, you can just say, hey, Robin, okay, you're giving me 100K, sign this, wire the money, great. And the next month, I mean, we're actually going to talk about, I think an ideal process is actually more like compact, where it's back to back, so it won't make as much of a difference. But the reality is that sometimes you're really getting money over a long period. So, and it is a lot less legal fees as well. Like doing a safe note is almost like no legal fee. Like you have somebody review it, and but it's like probably 30K of legal fees if you do a priced round. It's just a lot more coordination. So this tends to be something that investors and founders will like disagree on slightly, that founders are like, it's way easier and less fees, and Anne has a good point about the it can get tricky, but yeah. What are other people's thoughts on it?
Game changer for me being able to take cash when I was offered it. Like we had done a couple of rounds or a couple of like groupings where we were trying to get everyone to close on the same day.
Yeah.
And if you are in this fortunate few position where you get the FOMO and everyone's like trying to get you in, and you're able to like push people against each other, and you actually get to work towards a date, it's incredible. You're one of the lucky ones. Go for it, because it will be way better. The majority of people aren't in that position. And again, it is different. I think something that I was earlier about raising in San Francisco, like there are more people who have cash of a check size, you know, between like 10K and 25K, which I was happy to take. And being able to send out paperwork really quickly and get that money transferred within 48 hours, like that all started to build up. It leaves you with a very complicated like cap table and a bit of stuff to management. And the downside of that is you don't have any like leadership or authority from necessarily one lead investor or main person that's kind of, you know, going on this journey with you at that stage. But for me, that was fine. And I just wanted the cash more than anything.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, I think now looking back at it, we raised our first $1 million on a convertible note. We raised our second round of $3 million it was a price round. And the good thing about a convertible note is that it's rolling. And my experience with a lot of founders is like, when you need the money, you need the money. You don't want to wait till some end date when everyone gets their shit together. Like you just want to get your money. But I agree with Anne that it is a bit more nebulous. And I think there's sort of this like misnomer out there about convertible notes that you're not really pricing your round because it's a convertible note. And in effect, you are. You just don't know the exact price yet, you know. But in effect, if you've got a valuation cap and you've got a discount, like you are in effect sort of pricing your round. So, you know, I think it makes sense that people want to do a convertible note for their first round, because I think being able to accept money on a rolling basis often outweighs how things can become as a result when you're raising going forward. But I also wanted to address, sorry, I know I'm not the moderator, but a question I saw from Allison. She asked, like, what are signals that an investor might be steering your company in the wrong direction? And we've certainly walked away from investors, and we've certainly walked away from dollars. And I think you have to be prepared to do that sometimes, because there are investors who simply don't want to do the thing that you want to do with your company. And at the end of the day, you're the expert in your company. So I would say a major signal is if you're sitting down with someone and they are more or less trying to tell you what your business is going to be, as opposed to approaching it with curiosity and excitement about what you're building. And, oh, that sounds really cool. And what do you think about this? And hey, have you thought about that? And that to me is the sign of like an investor who sees you as someone who has landed on something really cool and wants to get to know more about it. An investor who's coming in and aggressively being like, why aren't you doing this? And I think you need to do this. In my experience, those are the investors we walked away from, because I'm never going to believe that you know more about my business than I do. I don't think any entrepreneur can succeed if they thought that. You know, it's just like, it's too hard to not think that you're the expert in what you're doing. So that to me is one of the major signals that it's not worth the relationship.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for sharing that.
I actually really love that. I mean, I think one of the things that I, as an investor, try to do to get to what KJ is saying is one of the first questions I ask is, why is this your life's work? And I want to know if that's a great story. And then the second thing that I'm trying to get to is like, what is the core thing that you believe about your business that won't change, right? And there's some things that you guys are building your business on that even if the data is a little bit murky, you're going to still believe it. And you want your investors to believe in that thing. And I think it's so critical for you to get to the bottom line of, do you believe in this thing? Because sometimes the data is going to come back and it's going to be like, we're not so sure. It's not like a slam dunk, but I'm going to be headed in that direction regardless. And I want to get to the bottom of that as an investor, because if I don't believe that thing, there's no point in us working together, because I want to believe in that thing, even if the data is murky. And I don't want you to pivot away from it. And too often, like the investor doesn't do the homework to figure that piece out. And that's on us, because an entrepreneur's job is to figure out how to get the dollars out of us. But it's my job as an investor to figure out if I want that long-term relationship and if that's going to be a healthy relationship. And so I do believe that, like, if your investors aren't asking these types of questions, then you should know that at least in the back of your head. And you should know that, like, they don't understand that part of your business. If you feel like they don't believe in that core part of your belief, that's something that you should have identified before you take their dollars. And it's a risk factor, right? Mm-hmm. Doesn't mean you don't take their dollars, but it's a risk factor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. So Karen chimed in with a question asking us, can you define what is a seed round? Everyone has different definitions. So yeah, there's like pre-seed, there's seed, there's, the bridge after the seed, maybe, who would want to take this on? And you might be in the best position to answer that.
Yeah. So we have different, I would call them different products, right? So I think of, and this is very different from enterprise software and consumer, and we invest actually in both. And so I see different versions of it, what stage you need to be at. I think actually in general, as a rule, enterprise software needs to be a little bit further along, because it's easier to vet. And so oftentimes we see a lot of companies that are sort of already out there building product. The only exception to that rule on the enterprise software side is if you have a technical insight and you're building some deep technology, then oftentimes we will invest far before product is actually built. Mm-hmm. So there's sort of like these two different ends of the barbell. Mm-hmm. And then consumer has a similar sense. Like, we like to see more developed consumer product, but if you have like this kind of golden nugget insight that we feel like no one else has really figured out yet, then oftentimes we will even go in pre-product. So you have to figure out, like, what is the thing that you have? What's the asset that you have? Is it traction, or is it like a really golden nugget insight? And then based on that, it changes the product that you're looking for. So the products, at least for Floodgate, and I'm going to put this out with a caveat of, we are completely cheap. And from a valuation perspective, we end up amongst our competition being on the low end. We have sort of a $500,000 for a $5 million valuation product. Oftentimes that is pre-product. It's sort of very, very early days, consumer or enterprise. Then we have sort of a $1 to $2 million investment. That ends up being in the valuation around $6 to $8 million. So that's post-money valuation. Now there are cases where it just pushes to $10 to $12 million valuation, but that's sort of 1 to 2.5 is that core, what I would call seed round investment. When you get to A or sort of post seed, seed prime, mango, those are, that's where I would say it's like the $3 to $5 million range. And again, most of the time the founder is selling somewhere between, I would say 10 to 25% of the company. And even for the Series A, like a very typical Series A, these days I'm seeing $10 million at $40 million post-money valuation. And then you could sort of pull that back to what are the metrics that you need to hit in order to justify that kind of valuation. There are ways in which you can justify that valuation just from a story perspective. If you're a SaaS business, you might need like $3 to $4 million of ARR. But then every day I see companies that break those rules, and they have like their pre-product, they raise $20 million at a $80 million valuation. So take all of these metrics with a gigantic grain of salt, because your peers are out there breaking all of those rules, and you should try to. But if you really want kind of a slam dunk, those are the kinds of things you ought to be thinking about.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that, as Anne said, like some people are able to go in and raise multi-million-dollar rounds, without anything, and others might struggle and want to like get a little bit of traction and then go and raise that. And we'll talk about this more when we get to like running a process, but it's also okay to kind of like go out and be thinking like, okay, I would raise up to 2 million, but I'll start with angels, and you end up with like 500K, and that's okay. You can go and use that and make progress and then come back for the 2 million, 6 months or 12 months later once you've made, and that's like very common for something like that to happen. So.
Yeah, I would say on the people asking, sorry if we're getting to this later, I just feel like I'm all over the place, but for the people asking, because a lot of people have about raising when you're pre-revenue, I have watched a number of female founder friends who have raised pre-revenue enter like sort of what I think of as like a trap, where you're able to raise that money without any revenue on your background and the fact that you went to, HBS, and you like, I don't know, you talk a good game and you've got a pretty deck. But then when you need more capital, right? It's because maybe you're sort of doing a slight pivot, or maybe you didn't get to product market fit as quickly as you thought. I've watched women struggle with that next bit a lot more than men. I think men get more runway. I think men get more money up front, pre-revenue, which means they get more of an opportunity to sort of prove out, like, okay, I thought it was going to happen like this, it didn't quite happen like that, but then I like did this thing. It's like they just get more time to figure it out. And I've watched my female founder friends get less time. So if you're raising pre-revenue, kind of to your point around like maybe it's raising a small amount here and then raising more later, I think you just have to be super, super, super clear about the milestones you think you can hit with your pre-revenue money, and have as many of those milestones not be revenue as possible, right? Like have it be users, have it be followers, have it be the number of, like if you're in tech, however much software you created. I don't know, I'm not a tech person, but like I have just watched this happen enough times where I'm like, if you're going to raise pre-revenue, there's just so much you don't know until you start selling whatever your good or your service is. There's so much that you just haven't had a chance to prove out. So if you're going to do it, like, I think it's about creating milestones that an investor can understand, so that when you hit them, they can say, all right, let's pump a little bit more money into the business, even if, you are still pre-revenue or you haven't hit the amount of revenue that you thought you would by now. And that's a real difference I've seen between my male founder friends and female founder friends who did the same thing.
Also, this is a really good point, that if you're raising pre-revenue, I mean, no matter whether you're pre-revenue or not, just raise more than you think you need, because it is going to take you more money and more time than you think. Everybody always says that, and founders like consistently make that mistake. And if you're pre-revenue and you have what Henry called this like golden nugget of an idea, which is how we raised the money, our initial round, which was 1.5 million, and people are getting really excited, take more money, because you need that buffer, and it's the most excited people will be, because once you actually start getting traction, it's not, unless it's like magical, it's not going to explode right away. So that second round, if you need a little more money, it's going to be harder to get, like KJ said. So take more and plan, just build in a lot of buffer.
I completely agree with that. I got that advice as well. When I was raising my seed round, I was like, I think I need $1 million. And someone was like, just get double, like raise double what you think. So I raised 2, and I really needed the second $1 million because I didn't have product market fit. I pivoted and basically used the first $1 million on the thing that wasn't working. And then I had another $1 million to pivot into something that did work. And that really saved me. So I completely agree with Zara's advice of raise more than you think you need, because it always takes longer and costs more money than you think.
Yeah. And the best advice I got is like raise 2, but act like you raised 1, save that as that other 1 million for a rainy day. I think, is this true, Felicia? It's like women, or maybe in general, people in general, founders raise an average of 6 million before getting to their Series A in like multiple rounds.
I'm not sure of that metric.
Yeah, but there's basically like, there's a lot of us here on this panel, and a lot of founders in general have, their seed, and then a node, and then an extension, and it's like you can avoid that by raising extra, but also if that's the case, like you don't have to feel like terrible, because it's pretty common.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think an important thing to note too is like I think on average, like women raise less, and part of it is there's like bias and that kind of thing, but I think also women sometimes go out to raise less than men, and you have to think about, you're going to be competing with other people that have raised more than you at the A, and the Series A investors aren't going to be like, oh, but you only raised 1 million and this other person raised 3, so we're going to like give you a break. Like they're just going to be like, do I want to invest in this Series A or not? So it's a little bit of an arms race in a way, in that aspect. So you want, like, if you're going to go for that like Series A route, you want to raise a decent sized seed round to try to get as far along with that seed to get good metrics for an A. Let's see. Okay. Oh yeah, so we kind of touched on this. I wanted to dig in a little more of like, I think Zara, you were saying this, like when before you've done anything, like people are the most excited because like a vision is like so perfect and there's nothing you can like pick apart about it. And so just like, what are the optimal moments of like fundraising? And I think that's really important. So I would give a couple 2 cents, and then I would love everyone's thoughts. Like, I think like pre-launch, if you're able to pull that off, is great, because again, it's like a vision, it's a dream. I think a bad time to raise is you just launched and it like didn't go well, or like or kind of like you had a good launch and then it like has been going down. That's not good. That's like the trough of sorrow. You want to avoid raising during that period. So basically it's like pre-launch, or like something's going well. Like investors want to see that like they're investing right before it's like going to really take off. So like some indication of, wow, we just got a jump in growth, or we're about to launch this thing that's going to be really great. Something along those lines is really helpful. And I think they're also looking at like trajectory. So like, how long have you been working on it, and what is like the progress that you've made? If you've been kind of working on it for a couple of years and it's like been doing roughly the same thing for a couple of years, that's not going to be very interesting. Versus if you've made that same progress in like 2 months, that's like a lot better. So like think about what is the inflection points that are like would be exciting to tell a story, and then also you want to show trajectory would be my 2 cents. Any other people have other thoughts on like advice on when is a good moment?
For seed, I think it's also like when it's well, when you have to, because you're probably like planning ahead and you might be running out of money, but also when it's right for you. You're probably a really small team of maybe just you, or maybe you and like 3 other people. You always have this like tough balance on a seed of trying to, you're like showing this one metric which has been going really well for 3 months, and you're trying to show that off, and at the same time you're not running the business anymore to make sure that metric is still going in the right place. I mean, if possible, if you can set it up that you think that the rest of the team can actually make that metric carry on growing during that time, that's great. I also think it takes about like 3 months of setup before you can go out and start raising a seed. And that for me was just like building relationships with other founders who could introduce me to other like angels or other funds. Like getting, like making sure that the business and that one core metric was looking good. So kind of planning ahead. I had 3 months set up, and then my first fundraiser took 8 months to raise $1 million, and then YC is like a super different environment. But so yeah, it took us 8 months. I think people want to aim for somewhere between 3 to 6 months is probably realistic to raise a seed.
I'll second that. In the beginning, like I see questions about how do you run a tight fundraising process and sort of like keep things efficient. And I think the idea of a tight fundraising process when you are either pre-launch or you just launched and you're just sort of starting to show that you've done anything worth caring about is an idea for like white men, to be just very candid. I think for the rest of us, the idea that you're going to have a tight fundraising process when you're doing like $3,000 a month in revenue, I don't know, you're selling people a dream, and it takes time to sell people a dream. You got to get in front of a lot of people. You got to get good at selling this dream and taking people on this journey. So I think one, you sort of have to get comfortable with the idea that for most of us, not all, some of you are superstars and are going to knock this thing out in a couple weeks, but for most of us, your first raise is not going to be a tight fundraising process, and you kind of just got to get comfortable with that. It'll take the 3 to 6 months. Your second one, though, to this question around when's the right time to raise, the right time is like when things are looking good. You've got, maybe it's just 1 metric, maybe it's 2, whatever it is, there's real demand, there's real excitement, maybe there's just even enough press. That's the time to go out. And that's when I think you can do a tighter process. That's when I think you can be a bit choosier. You can say things like, look, we're closing the round at the end of May, and start giving people these mostly artificial deadlines. Like when you've got something to show for yourself, I think you can. And that to me is when you really want to time your raises. Like, I've really got this great story to tell right now. But I think telling yourself it's going to be a super tight raise when you're super, super early on is for most of us lying to ourselves. I just think you're selling a vision. And I personally think that takes time.
Yeah, I would jump in that I think there's a range, and I agree that like you shouldn't feel bad if it takes you a long time. I mean, there's like Airbnb like had a really hard time getting investors. Like there's like a ton of like really great companies that like struggled to raise. So it's not necessarily a sign that your company's like not gonna take off. But I think part of like the boot camp is us trying to level the playing field of like helping people run tighter processes than has been possible by having a lot of the skills. I managed to raise in about a month my seed round, and I did have certain advantages. I was like well connected to other founders that were able to introduce me, and I had been on the investor side and like had seen a lot of pitches. But I think through Female Founder Office Hours, I've had sessions with people and then they've gone on to do that. And I think it is possible, but it's a mix of technique, but then also some luck of like, is your business like something that's really gonna like a lot of investors are interested in right now, and like that kind of thing too. And we want to try to like help as many of you as possible run a tight process. And if you don't, there's nothing wrong with you, because a lot of great businesses don't, and you should keep going. Okay, I have like a few more questions that are kind of part of our curriculum, and then I'm just gonna like go through the questions that are coming in and answer a bunch of other questions. So I'd love to ask the group, how do you know when, how did you know when your company had product market fit? Can you just like walk us through the journey of like how you found product market fit, and also like what would be any tips you'd give to founders that are to find it more quickly for themselves?
I remember everyone used to say this like stupid, shitty phrase of like, you just know, you just like feel it, and it drove me mental. And I was like, what does that mean? And the shit thing is, there's a real truth in it. And the reason that I didn't know and it was driving me crazy was because we didn't have it. And like, which was basically for us, like our main metric as a business is weekly active users. Like how many people are coming to the app, sticking around long enough that they don't churn immediately. And then later down, it's kind of coming into like premium and like retention rates on premium. But at the time it was weekly active users, and people weren't, basically they weren't sticking around. They were like joining up, but they weren't joining fast enough to the amount at how fast we were losing them out the bottom of the funnel. And so for us, it was when those two things kind of met in a balance, that we were getting a high enough volume of users and retaining a high enough volume of them that the whole user base was growing at a really good rate as well. Like every week we were growing more and more. And that was when it had like hit the better inflection point. And there's not like, for us, there wasn't one thing. There were a couple of like big decisions that we made product wise that really helped with it. But it was, you know, having tried like 53 other things before that, that were just constantly trying to see what would make more people come and use the app, and then what would make more people stick around and enjoy using it more.
That makes sense. So what would be your tip to like someone that's kind of like, do I have product market fit? Like, how can I get there more quickly? Like, what would be your tip for them to find it more quickly?
To find it more quickly,
or to know when they have it. Well, you kind of
have it. I don't know, like thinking about it now, I'm like, I want to show it to a few investors and see what they say about it. Like they have a lot more data points than I do, and probably than you do as a founder. Like, take it out to a couple of people that maybe you don't care about raising money from and see what they say about it. Or if you've got, you know, a network like All Raise, like share it with some people, see what they say. If you are growing, I think it's just growth. Like if you're growing fast and you're growing revenue, you're growing users, that's the best first indication of it. And then there's like slightly deeper indicators of like, what does retention or longer term value look like? To get there faster, I don't know, I think I just like always had this belief at first, it's just like shipping stuff faster that is like still reliably-ish. And every time we published something new or put something out, allowed us to get more data on, was this the change that would have a greater impact and the thing that would shift the needle slightly. And so just trying to evaluate decisions as best as you can, as fast as you can, and get them shipped as fast as you can.
You know, one thing I just wanted to say, and maybe hopefully this makes founders feel better. As an investor, observing, and as an investor who specializes in pre-product market fit companies, one of the things that I've seen is that product market fit takes an undetermined amount of time. And you as a founder, if you raise some amount of like pre-seed or seed financing, and I've seen this because I've talked to our founders, they raise like, you know, somewhere between $500,000, $2 million, and they have it in the bank. And on that day, they're thinking to themselves, I have this capital, but I barely have a product. I have a few employees, but not enough. I'm trying to attract more employees. I don't have enough customers. I don't have enough revenues. I don't have enough resources. I don't have enough all of these things. And yet, in 18 to 24 months, I'm supposed to hit this thing called product market fit so I can raise my Series A. I don't even know what product market fit is, right? And I've seen this movie enough times that like I hand this check over to my founder, and I look at their eyes and I see their like pupils dilate, and I know what's the inner dialogue, and this is male or female. They're all going through this inner dialogue. And And half the time it's even like stupid operational shit.
And I think you just went mute a couple seconds ago.
Can you hear me again?
Yeah, yeah.
And I see this in the eyes of our founders when we give them an investment, and I'm thinking to myself, I know what you're thinking. Like, I actually know what you're thinking and I know what you're feeling. And I feel the same thing. Like, I invested knowing all of these things. I don't know what product market fit is. I know that it's like a cohort that looks great, but that's something that you should engage with your investors. If they're willing to engage on it, what does it look like? And what's really been really interesting for me is like every single company, product market fit looks really different. And people will say, oh, it's like this feeling that like when you see it, you'll know it. That's just like, it's so annoying to hear that, because like, what does that mean? Right? And so, like, so for certain founders, like, we'll just sit down and we're like, what's my hypothesis for what product market fit looks like? Well, it'll look like this for a cohort. So let's measure it for a cohort. Okay, then how do we get a cohort, right? Like, it can be as basic as that. And so you want both your founders to be engaged in that thought process of what does product market fit look like. You want investors to think about it as well. You want them to be obsessed with it. But the most important thing is that you want your investors to know that there is no operational timeline for figuring out product market fit. There's an operational timeline for growth, because that's very predictable. But product market fit, I've seen it take 6 months, and then I've seen it take 36 months. Like, how do you reconcile that? I don't know. But as a seed stage investor that's only focused on that, that's something that I've seen time and time again. And it's the thing that scares us as investors, because 12 months in, they haven't found product market fit, but I've seen companies hit it at 36 months and hit it spectacularly. In fact, Lyft took over 30 months to find product market fit. And if we hadn't been engaged and patient, we would have been one of those idiot investors who pulled back at the last minute before the company really went north. And so those are the things that, like, you as a founder.
Hey, Ann, you just went mute again a few seconds ago.
I know. I don't know what's going on with my computer, but
Okay.
But you just want to be engaged with your investors on that front. And if they're not engaged with you on that front, they're not patient with you. If they don't understand that the timeline is very fungible, then that's data for you to know as well, right? Because they should actually be very patient.
So actually, Anne, on the Lyft example, because I feel like when I was talking about my female founder friends who couldn't get there, it's because maybe they would have gotten to month 30 and found their product market fit, but they didn't get until month 30. And so, like, what were the things that team was showing you along the way that made
that's a really good and important question. So thank you, KJ. I think so the things that we're looking for is grit. And I think this is something that women are not good at showing. They have it, they don't present it, right? And so what you really want to show is, here's the core belief that I have. So in Lyft's case, they believed that sharing the ride was a core part of how you make transportation work. And they were very fungible on how you would share that ride. So the initial take was, we're going to have this platform where everyone will carpool. And they were like, well, we're not really sure that from a revenue standpoint, selling platforms to universities and corporations really gets us to this like massive business. So then they said, what if we go direct to consumers? And then they said, well, what's the way in which we engage with those consumers? Is it through, long haul rides? So they tried San Francisco to Tahoe, San Francisco to LA, and they had van products, they had bus products. And then their last iteration was, well, mobile is really taking off. What if we had this mobile product and people are sharing rides because they show when they have availability of rides within their own cars. And so it was this series of iterations. I'm skipping a few, but like they had a series that all kind of focused around this core, when I talk about core belief of people ought to share the ride and that will be a magical experience. And we should be able to make money off of that, right? And they were iterating until they found a way of engaging their users, and they had a way of making money, which in the initial case was actually donations. So it wasn't even the final business.
Oh, and you're, I don't know.
So they figured out through this sort of massive iteration process how to have that kind of product market fit. But you're totally right in the sense that so I've seen women give up a lot earlier, right? And I think some of it is communication. Some of it is actually, I was talking about this yesterday with a group of female executives. I think it's actually communication on our part, and it's a mentality. So I oftentimes talk about my husband versus me. We both took the LSAT at the same, it wasn't at the same time, but we took the LSAT. He actually told me that he thought he got a perfect on his score. And for 2 weeks, until the time his score was published, he told everyone he thought he got a perfect on his LSATs. I actually told everyone, I think I should cancel my score. I thought I did horribly. I told all of my friends I did horribly. I should cancel my score. Should I cancel my score? Everyone talked me out of it. Guess what? We both had the same score. But that's the mentality you're fighting against, right? Mm-hmm. There's a serially optimistic voice. And if you don't kind of project that, think about what my friends thought of what my score was. They probably thought I failed the LSAT. And meanwhile, my husband was talking about how he got a perfect. He didn't get a perfect. But all of his friends think that he's a wild genius. And that projection is actually a really important moment. Like, think about the difference that makes for 2 weeks and what I projected versus what my husband projected. Not a bad person. I'm not a bad person, and it's not coming from a negative place, but I put myself in a negative place. And so I hurt myself in a way that I can't even like really grok, right? Mm-hmm. That's actually my natural state. I'm always thinking to myself, here are the 10 ways in which I failed today, right? And my husband's coming in the door like, here's the 10 ways I won.
Yeah.
And like, I would love for women throughout the world to think about the 10 ways they won all the time. Because just by thinking that way, you actually project a different version of yourself. And like in front of investors, that's really important. That's really important. Inexplicably important.
Yeah, I love that example. And I will just say, what I think what you said about Lyft that really caught for me as well is that their core belief was a big belief, like a big idea. Their core belief was, we're going to change the future of transportation. And we're going to do it by sharing the ride, and I think sometimes that to me feels like a big idea that you can iterate around, like you can be fungible around how we get there. We try it this way, we try it that way. I think sometimes what I also see is people don't get enough time to iterate because their core belief is something so narrow that it's like you can't how can you form that many ideas around it when what you're calling your core belief is like, everyone will buy my new scrunchie. If that's your core belief and no one buys the scrunchie, I don't even know how do you iterate around it. But like if your core belief is women are going to completely like undo the way they've thought about beauty for the last 20 years and whatever it is, then I think you have more.
This is so important. Listen to KJ on this. This is so important.
So I feel like I think getting out of a narrow frame of mind, and then to your point, bringing as much like of a just attitude of abundance and like of winning is so important. And it's hard to do, but I think like networks like this one, and I see everyone in the comments like forming groups, and like I think they're about to start a Slack channel. I think it's so important because I turn to my female founder friends all the time when I need that like boost of like, no, you know what you're doing, your brand is crushing it, like keep doing that thing. So yeah, I'm just saying I agree with you a lot.
I 1,000,000% agree with everything you guys have been saying. And I think that was like, honestly, like what you were just describing is actually a big catalyst for female founder office hours. Because similarly to what you both have said, I've just seen a lot of women like, talk about their companies, and they have like more traction than a man like that comes in, and they're like doubting it more and more humble about it. And frankly, like investors are used to seeing men because, the vast, like 90+% of founders in the past have been men. And if all the founders coming in are like, I'm going to do this like amazing thing, and then you come in and you're more humble about it, they're going to like compare you and not think that you are as impressive. And so I think we need, like, I think the future, the future world, we can like calibrate to different people's communication styles and recognize things like that. But in the meantime, that's like a long way out. And in the meantime, we actually need to calibrate ourselves up and sort of project the awesomeness that we are. And I love KJ's point about female founder groups and communities. And that's a huge part of my life. A lot of my closest friends are female founders, and it's a huge point of support. And it's great if you guys chat and form that. We're actually also going to help a little bit with that and make WhatsApp groups by sector a little bit so that people can get to know other women in the boot camp that are like with a similar sector to you and connect. And then we're also going to have a optional in-person at the end. Okay, awesome. Okay. So any other thoughts on product market fit and finding it, how you found it or finding it more quickly?
Oh, I also sent a link. It's lost now in the fold, but of a deck that Jeff Busgang of Flybridge put together around product market fit. It might be helpful. It might not, but it's out there in the chat.
Awesome. I would add that it took me 2.5 years to find product market fit. And I tried a bunch of different business models. And I think that like the annoying thing of like, when you have it is true. And I think that like, if you're not sure that you have it, you don't have it, I think is like the way to know. Because like for 2.5 years, I was like, do I have it? Like, maybe I have it. Maybe if I just like another month, then I'll maybe like, and I think now I would find it more quickly, mostly because I would change more quickly. Like I would iterate more quickly because I would know that I didn't have it, because I didn't fully realize like how badly I didn't have it. So I would stick with things a little bit too long. So I think that's my main advice, is sort of like, if it's not working and if it's not, really taking off, just continue to iterate and make tweaks. And I think that that would be my main advice. And also like talk to other people that have had product market fit and just be like, do you think I do? And like get them to be really frank with you. I think sometimes you can just kind of be in like a vacuum and like be doing your thing and have your head down. And if I think having other people that will be really brutally honest with you is really helpful. And one other thought is just launch as quickly as possible. Like unless, as Anne said, you have like some deep tech thing that you need a long time to get it out there. I definitely took too long to launch because I was like, oh my God, it needs like these 10 other amazing features that everyone's going to love so much. But that just delayed me getting it out in the world and realizing that it actually wasn't right, and like iterating to the next thing. So I think just getting it out there faster allows you to iterate more quickly. Okay. Any other product market fit thoughts? I have one other question, and then I'm going to go through all the Q&A. Okay, the last question is about of my stuff before we go through all the Q&A is just market sizing. So just let's just give them a little bit of a quick overview of like how did you tips on sizing your market, how do you size your market, and then like what is a big enough market for different kinds of investors.
Well, I'll just say I run a beauty company, and for the investors looking for the $1 billion unicorns, I am most typically not what they're looking for. Very few beauty companies make $1 billion or sell for $1 billion. That is just such a teeny tiny slice of the beauty pie. And I know that, so there are investors who are looking for that who I'm not pitching. That said, I like to think of beauty as, I mean, it's one of the few consumer product sectors that continues to grow year after year. And I like to think that for our investors who have shown a lot of interest in us and continue to show a lot of interest in us, we're the part of their portfolio that, you know, they're really banking on getting that 10x return on. It might not be 10x that gets you to $1 billion, but if you put in 5 and get 50 back, like that's not bad. No one's going to be mad at you. Well, I don't know, Anne might, right? Like she's really mad about that. But a lot of people are going to look at that and be like, hey, you know what? This is a good exit. This is strong. This is smart, and a good use of capital. And I think that's how our investors think about us. But again, there's a math equation that they're having to do. And it's not my job to do their math equation. Like it's my job to help them understand that beauty is a really attractive market precisely because these companies are spending billions of dollars a year on acquisition. And I think that I'm really attractive within that. So that, I guess, is sort of how I think about market sizing. Like, can I come to you and say, realistically, I can raise this much and be at, you know, $100 million in revenue, or even half that, $50 million in revenue, or even half that, $25 million in revenue, and have people like really look at me as a very attractive acquisition target. And if the answer is yes, then that means I am attractive to some investor, not necessarily Anne's fund or other $100 million funds, but there are investors who are going to look at that and say, yes, that return is attractive to me and makes sense in my portfolio. So I think just thinking about your market and how things work in your market is how we approached it. But we never pitched anyone that we were going to be the makeup unicorn. Oh, and someone's asking, are those mostly angels? No, they're $20 million funds. They're $50 million funds. Like there are funds that a company like ours makes sense for, and even bigger one. You know, we have funds that are $100 million plus, and for whatever reason, they thought the math made sense. Because again, like it's just not my job to do that investors' work. You know, like it's my job to be honest about what I really think we're going to do, and then it's their job to figure out if it makes sense for their portfolio.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Yeah, and in terms of like, you know, how to kind of tactically size your market, like, you know, there's some research out there that you can Google and be like, how much do people spend on lipstick or like whatever, you know, you're selling, and have like this top-down number that you can find. And then you can also do more of a bottom-up analysis of like, okay, this is how much we're charging because we started charging people, or this is how much we think we're going to charge, and this is how many people there are, and like do a bottom up. And I think it's good to actually do both and sort of like compare and make sure they make sense with each other, if that's at all possible. You know, sometimes I actually like to do like a market sizing page that has like concentric circles. And so for example, like for us, we sell into foster care in the government. So the first circle can be like, this is how much government spends on technology, right? And that's not like, we're not going after all of that, but it's just like, this is the really big number. And then within that, there's like, this is how much is on social services. And then within that, this is like foster care. And just to like orient people. And then, you know, then we can also make the story that we're starting here, but we're going to go after these ones in the future too. And that's a very popular market sizing page in a deck. Any other thoughts? Yeah. So in terms of like how big, like what are people's thoughts on how big of a market is big enough for different types of investors?
Billions and billions. Like, I feel
Yeah, I feel like they're always going to push you to be bigger.
it just has to be, and it's so like
Yeah.
it's kind of ridiculous because you're partially like, I feel like it's balancing these two things. Like, one, I think as a founder, it's important that you do practically understand the size of the market that you are looking at, because it goes back to Anne's first point that I said I wasn't aware of like, this is real. You're going to have to make this money as a business. You are actually going to have to do this. So realize if the market you are looking at actually can do it as you grow your business. But there are like, useful things to look at of like who's doing it now and how well are they doing. And so if there is anyone who's like comparable, and they're publicly, like if they're publicly listed, you can see any like numbers that come from them. But if you've got a slide in your deck and you're saying this is a total addressable market of like $600 million, don't go to any venture capital fund. Like unless you are probably over you're in a few $1 billion, then it's relevant for a venture fund. Would be my.
Oh, for sure. I mean, beauty is a $60 billion market, right? That's the big number. I feel like what I try to be a little bit more realistic about, and investors hate, is like how much of that pie I think I'm going to get. I think our first deck said we'll get 100 million of it. And people were like, why not 300 million? And I was like, well, I don't know. If you read anything about beauty, you would know, that like getting to 300 million in revenue is really fucking difficult. And like, by the way, so is getting to 100 million. But like, anyway, that's neither here nor there. But the point is, yes, the actual market you're going after does need to be like big, big, big. But then I personally think like, even if you're going to put a nonsense number in the deck, have some sense of clarity around like what you think is reasonable, so that you're not pushing yourself, to unrealistic standards. But that's me. I'm a pragmatist. Some people are like much more go after it. And I get that and I admire that, but I'm a pragmatist at heart. So I really want to know, can I hit 100 million? Okay. So now that's what I'm going to try for, not $1 billion, but that's me.
The way we did our market sizing is definitely the bottoms up, like so we're in a category that it's like a new category. Baby education is not something that people are currently spending tons of money on. And so looking at the number of like how much people spend on toys for babies, even that is small, because only like a tiny percentage of toys in the country are marked safe for babies. So we really had to like extrapolate and come up with like the number of parents at a certain income level who are interested in education, take our price point and like figure out what that market would be. And I think that it was a really good exercise for us. And investors some investors just, I don't know if I'm sharing this because I don't know if any the people on the call are in this situation, but some investors don't want to sign up for a business that is kind of a new category. And then some investors think that's super exciting because it's like a blue ocean and you can actually make a ton of money and impact. So that's how we did it. And I think what Anne said in the beginning, like you can know everything about a fund by their fund size. You can also think about that when thinking about market size, like how big is your market? How much of it can you actually get? Therefore, how much money are you going to get? And what is the right venture fund for you to talk to?
One thing I would say is something that's happened over the last 10 years, and I'm not really sure what drives it, is that almost every company that is entrepreneurial in nature assumes that they have to raise venture capital dollars. Mm-hmm. And the truth of the matter is there are some businesses that are really oriented towards that. And then there are others that are not. And there have been great businesses built. And there was a question that was posted a while ago about companies that didn't raise that much capital that got to great exits over $100 million. There are significant examples of that, right? So if you look at traditional retail companies, most of the retail companies didn't raise venture capital dollars. They would raise friends and family, and then they would typically sell at sort of a $50 million run rate. And they would sell to private equity firms. So I've seen that over and over again. There are also examples of SaaS businesses that raised less than $4 million to get to $50 million in revenues. So a great example of that is Viva Systems. They raised, I think, a total of $7 million and only spent $4 before they IPO'd, and I think they're close to $10 million in market cap at this point. Another example of that is Qualtrics. They didn't raise until they got to a $50 million run rate, $250 million in valuation. They just sold for $8 million, and the Smith family owned 50% of that.
You just went mute. And in case people couldn't tell, she was saying $8 billion.
$8 billion.
Million versus billion with a B.
$8 billion. They own 50% of the company, and I say that mostly because like Ryan Smith couldn't raise the dollars because he was in Utah. So for all the ladies out there, like, we can't raise the dollars. It can become a power because maybe you'll own 50% of an $8 billion exit. And what was interesting is that there's these examples of very capital efficient businesses that exit, and then the owners own a ton of it because they've been very capital efficient. I think that the main lessons that I've taken out of those examples is that these are not unicorns. They are not fictional creatures. They actually exist in the wild. You could be one of them. And as someone just said, they're rhinos. They will actually, they empower the founders. And if I've seen anything that I really believe in, it's that if female founders can be this capital efficient, they will be extraordinarily, wildly, crazy rich. And then they can actually then build, they can be the funders behind incredible female businesses afterwards. Like I invested in TaskRabbit in 2009. And then as Leah Buskey exited the business, she is now a venture capitalist. And I think of that as the circle, the real circle of life when it comes to entrepreneurship. And you want to be able to fund that. KJ, Robin, Zara, these are the Felicia are the future funders. We need to make them wildly rich, and then they will then be angel investors in future companies. That's sort of the cycle that I think we really need to support, and that's why I'm here today.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Anne. I love that vision. Let's do it. Awesome. So I'm looking at some of the questions here. Someone asked, is All Raise investors all VCs, or are there a mix of angels? So the women who kind of started All Raise are VCs, but as part of the program, basically you're going to go through these 4 sessions. You're going to get a mentor at the end, be able to practice your pitch. And then if the mentor feels that you are ready to get investment to the point that they would introduce you to their investors. So it's sort of like you have to pass, them feeling like, yep, you're ready to go out. Then we do have a network of investors that include the All Raise women VCs, but also a bunch of other angels and investors. It's basically a lot of the investors that have invested in the mentors in the network. We've asked our investors if they want to see deal flow from us. And we have quite a lot of angels and VCs that have that are part of that. So we will basically help make warm introductions. We'll send your blurb out, and then if they're open to an intro, we'll make an introduction. But that is not just guaranteed at the end of the program. You have to be ready. You have to pitch to the mentor. The mentor has to say you're ready. if you end up pitching the mentor and the mentor's like, you're not ready yet, you can practice, return, and like get another mentor session, and come back later too.
And just on the topic of angel investors, because I saw a lot of people asking, I think one of the questions was around like, how much equity should you give up if it's an angel investor? And it's my perspective, and I might be wrong on this, so I'll turn it to you guys, but you're not giving up more or less money because an investor is an angel versus a VC. It's just a bigger or smaller check. Like if it's actually an angel investor. Now, if by angel investor you mean like your Uncle Tom, right, who's just sort of willing to write you a $50,000 check and he doesn't care what the terms are because he loves you, then yeah, maybe you don't have to give up as much equity. But if we're talking about legitimate angel investor, like this is a thing that they do on a regular basis, they're going to be looking for, they're going to be looking for terms that make sense for them the same way a VC is. So I don't think it's a question of, how much should I give up to an angel? I think you should be figuring out what you think your company is worth, whether you're doing a priced round or a convertible note, and then everyone gets those terms. If you're doing it on a $5 million cap, the angel gets the $5 million cap, the VC gets the $5 million cap. And then another question I saw was just around like, how do you find angel investors? And hopefully this is something that all of you will have a much tighter process as a result of Female Founder Office Hours. But I did cold email angel investors. Well, cold in the sense that I didn't know them. I looked for people on LinkedIn. I looked for people in my business school network. And then I used LinkedIn to figure out who do I know who knows that person. So it was a warmer email, right? It was a warmer intro, but they didn't know who I was. But I did that because I didn't have a network of angel investors. So shout out to everyone who already does, just know a bunch of people with disposable money to, throw away, but I don't have that network. So I had to find it. And so it was a lot of going through LinkedIn, going through my network, going through databases, reading articles, and then trying to find the author of that article who said that they were an angel investor. Like it was a lot of hitting the pavement, and hopefully, you guys, your timeline will be shorter and tighter as a result of the networks that you're building. But it wasn't like there was some angel investor database that I just could scroll through. Although I guess that's sort of what Angel List is. But people that made sense for what I was doing, that took time.
Thanks for sharing that. And we'll definitely dig a little bit more into like how to set your valuation, and like running a process in a couple sessions to dive even deeper into that. Okay. So someone asked like, what are metrics you need for a Series A? I think that's actually a great question, because if you're raising a seed, like you want to be communicating. First of all, you want to think you can get to the metrics to raise a Series A if you're looking for that path, and also you want to be communicating to investors that you'll be able to hit these milestones that they'll be looking for, hoping that you'll be able to raise an A. So what are people's thoughts on that?
I'm out, not for me.
I can chime in. I think it depends a lot. Like Anne was saying, like if it's something that takes a long time, like some people raise their A and they still don't have revenue yet, if it's like a really hard thing to build or something like that. I think if it's like SaaS, like enterprise, it used to be like $1 million of revenue for an A. I think now it's like the bar is being raised over time, especially as people are like raising bigger seeds and they're able to get further along. So maybe it's like 2 or 3 million is like good. And then I don't know as much for consumer, what people are looking for. And do you want to like chime in?
So consumer and enterprise are very, very different. Consumer, there's really two phases. There's sort of, we don't know what we're doing, and then we totally know what the hell we're doing. And so it's a phase change that I've seen. And the problem ends up being, I hate to say this, but like I've seen guys raise with like very little on the we don't know what we're doing side, and women tend to wait until further along on the product cycle side. Okay, I'm back.
Mhm.
Early on, what we see is early stage, we're looking for companies have very, very unique insights. So there's three questions that we're asking. Why is this your life's work? The second question we ask is, what's your earned secret? So what's the thing that you know that other people don't know that would be semi-controversial? And then the third piece is why now? So we want to know those three questions. We actually ask that for all companies, and compelling answers on all three dimensions leads you to sort of the next level. When you get to companies that have kind of turned the corner and have a little bit of someone's asking me to repeat the three questions. So is this your life's work, and why is this your life's work? The second is, what is your earned secret? And the third is, why now? And some people are asking, what would I consider a compelling answer? But that is something that you have to figure out. Like, I don't like to create a framework for that. We see answers to that question both through an application process and in our Salesforce account across hundreds of different companies. And so if you think about how do you want to stand out on the basis of those three questions, just imagine like what's the range of answers that we get. As you get to more mature product, we still ask those three questions, but then we're asking for cohort analysis. What that means is we're looking at the cohorts of companies, of customers that are coming through, and we're looking at engagement, because that to me is actually product market fit. The way I define product market fit is engagement of customer. And I think about the 10x advantage that the startup has and how engaged is the customer relative to that 10x advantage. And if we believe that the customer is bought into that 10x advantage, and the way that we need to just grow the business is purely in finding more customers who would be irrational not to buy from that company, then we're doubling down on those motions. So there's sort of this pre-product market fit, which is we're really buying into the story. And then, Josh Koppelman says there's no.
Oh, you're muted.
Josh Koppelman says there's nothing that ruins a story like numbers. So the thing that we're looking for is something beyond that story that proves that the story is really real. And I think, I think the hard part of what I'm describing is it is very different for every startup company. So when I'm giving advice to a particular company, the way we construct the story to go out and pitch to investors is actually fairly unique. But that's the framework that I'm using in general to construct that story.
Awesome. So I've seen a bunch of questions come in about location, and like some people are located in other parts of the US and other people are outside of the country. So what are people's thoughts on sort of if you're in other parts of the US or if you're out of the country, like raising money in those locations versus like flying to the Bay Area and raising money, and or moving your company to the Bay Area or somewhere else? I know, KJ, you are not in the Bay Area. I forget where you're located. Do you want to maybe share your perspective?
Yeah, I'm in New York, so a fair number of investors, but I for both raises basically do like a road show, if you want to call it, in the Bay Area, just because there is just sort of an abundance of money and capital out there. So it's my perspective that you certainly don't need to move to the Bay Area. I would just very much advise everyone not to do that if you don't love it out there. I personally hate it out there. Don't do that. Just please, for your own mental health, don't do that unless you want to be there, because you don't need to live there to raise money from the investors there. I do think, depending on how much capital you're raising, it is probably a good idea at some point to just book some appointments with investors out there, because once you've booked time, like other investors will get on your calendar, like, and you can pretty easily fill up like a week or, 3 or 4 days. I think for me, at least, that's always been worthwhile, but I cannot for the life of me understand why someone would just up and move out there. But I run a beauty business also, so New York makes way more sense for that.
So I am in the Bay Area. I actually like it here. But I think that I've definitely seen people do what KJ has done, and like just fly in and raise money here. And I definitely think that there's other places around the country popping up that are like really great places to start companies. I mean, New York, obviously. And I mean, there's other big hubs like Austin and Seattle and Portland and Denver and a few others where there's starting to be like a good ecosystem. LA. And then it's also cheaper. Like the Bay Area is the most expensive place in the country, and that's not ideal when you're like trying to get something up and running and don't have a lot of money. So that's actually becoming like a big disadvantage about being in the Bay Area. So I think like maybe 10 years ago, it was like you kind of need to be here. But now it's like there's other places that there's like a good community and other people that can like join your company and invest in your company and like, be peers and mentors. But I do think that there are the most investors out here, and they tend to be more comfortable with more risk. Like they'll invest earlier with like less metrics, on better terms in the Bay Area compared to the rest of the country. So that's like something to keep in mind.
I think it depends a lot on your sector. And what that market is like for fundraising. I think if you're talking about like the big capitals and the big cities of the world, there is always money in all of these places. Like, of course there is. One thing that I found so unique about being in San Francisco, and I think this may have changed in other cities over times, but the volume of angels is incomparable to like anywhere else in the world. And that's because if you work at a tech company and you have disposable income, and let's say you've got 10 grand, in San Francisco, you're gonna angel invest in a company, and that like just doesn't happen in London. It's just not the mentality of most people living there. So there's not that whole pool of people to go and approach to get money from. There's also just a different mentality. And for me, it was like, it's totally different ways of pitching in London than it is in San Francisco. Like I was, I'm like super pumped by the, like, the confidence mentality that you have to have in San Francisco to raise money. But in London, it's completely different. Like they think you've lost your marbles if you're pitching saying, I've got 0 metrics and 0 product, but I'm going to change the world. They're like, cool, see you in 10 years. Like it's just completely different. So if you're in London, you have to raise differently. So I started in London and then moved to San Francisco. For me, for consumer, there was just way more people willing to take a bet on that. In London, it's so rare to find consumer investors, and if they are, they're looking for a bunch of revenue or like much further down the line, and it was going to take us a while to get there. So I came to San Francisco and people were offering me money without me even asking for it. And over there, it took me like 25 meetings to beg someone for a check. So like San Francisco is just way better for us, and it's just like a totally different style of pitching. For me, I wanted to stay here because for my longevity and for the longevity of our business, it just made it way easier to be based here, to like organically build relationships with the community that is here. I kind of decided there is more money here, there are more funds, there's more potential here to raise further down the line. And you can travel and go do it, but it takes a lot of work, and you're having to like artificially build whole communities, almost for me, like in each city, each time you go to them. And I just wanted to like stack the cards in my favor as much as possible in the city that I thought was going to be the best for me personally long term, and also for my business right now. And so that's why I did San Francisco move.
Mm-hmm. I also think it's really helpful to be in a place where there's a lot of other founders that are further along than you that you can ask advice from. Like, I worked on a company for like 6 months before I started Binti, and I was in Philadelphia, and I maybe it's growing now, but at the time, like there just weren't a lot of other people to like learn from there, and I just felt like I was in a vacuum, just making all these mistakes, and no one was like telling me, Felicia, this is really, really bad. And so now it's really nice to have a lot of founders around that I can like just bounce things off of, and they're a little further along, and they can give perspective. What about like, and Robin, you might be a good person, or Anne, like, so some founders live in other countries, and presumably their market is maybe that country to start with. Like, can you maybe give some advice about how to think about raising money there, or coming here to raise money, or?
Mine was slightly different in that like most of our market ended up being in the US. It is the majority. So that's kind of why the move made sense. And so my experience of that was I came over here and people just didn't give a shit about anything in London. It was basically like it didn't exist. Like they didn't care about like the partnerships we'd done, about like who we'd got checks from and what their personal background was. It was the proper, like, my experience was that the bubble that exists here was like super real. But and the only other thing I can like reference is having done YC, and there's a bunch of companies that are from like operating in however many different like countries across the world. And I think that, people aren't like totally ignorant. Like there's huge opportunity in markets in other countries. It's just like building I've just seen them like build really great stories, and often it's been through X for Y, like so-and-so who did this in the US, like we've got the opportunity to do it in another market. And I think that's just been like listening to demo days, what seems successful, but I'm very small data set, and prob's best to ask Anne, not me.
So a lot of the smaller U.S. investors will only invest in U.S. incorporated companies, and that's just for some complicated tax reasons. And so if you are a foreign company, it is to your advantage to maximize possibilities of getting investors from the U.S. to incorporate in Delaware. Because a lot of the seed stage investors just don't have the platform or the resources to invest in foreign companies. So that's just sort of a suggestion that I would have. And as a result of companies making that move, we have investments in China, we have an investment in Singapore, Indonesia, and one in Germany, but they are all incorporated in Delaware.
Okay. So, Anne, you would look at companies that like their primary market is in another country, assuming that their market was big enough.
We would, though I actually believe that for the founder, the better thing is to find an investor that's local. And part of it is that, seed stage is different from where when you're in the process of looking for product market fit, you just have a lot of questions, and like there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of room for opinions, versus once you're on product market fit and you're growing your business, that's a different phase of your business. There's a process and a playbook for that. And so I actually think that in the early stages, you kind of want people that you could bounce ideas off of more frequently. And so if you have the option, then taking investments from people who are close to you, who have operational experience, who have connections to other employees, is a better idea than taking investment from capital in California that's like, thousands of miles away.
That makes sense. Someone just asked a follow-up question of like, is it a problem if you incorporate in a different state, for example, California? I think like jumping back, like away from the international conversation, I think, like Anne said, do a Delaware C Corp. That's what everybody does. Everybody's familiar with it. You can be, I'm in California, but we're a Delaware C Corp. It's really easy to do. And that's just like the standard. So just do that and no one will ask any questions. Okay, someone asked about, some investors have been asking for a board seat if they come into the seed round. What are people's thoughts on that?
It's pretty unusual to give a board seat at this stage, and I would say you could have an advisory board to kind of make them happy and also get yourself some advice. If you actually really like this person, you want them to be involved, you think they're going to be helpful. I know founders who set up advisory boards, which is very different from an actual board. So that's one way to kind of deal with it. And if they're being really stubborn on just having a board seat, they might not be the best investor for you because it's actually really uncommon.
Like from my perspective, I would actually love to not be on a bunch of boards, but I get asked to be on boards. And so I take board seats on about 50% of the companies that I am involved with. And that just means an extra level of, I guess, service agreement. And so to me, I'm like, you know, if you don't want me on the board, great. I'd love to work in that capacity. If you want me on the board, then I feel obligated to take it, especially if I have a certain ownership in the company. And I think from a founder's perspective, you have the right to ask for a lot of things from a board member. And if the investor is not willing to give that to you, then that's a big question mark. You know, the companies that I work with at the very early stage, we are helping them figure out what a board even looks like at this stage. What should you be reporting to your investors? What should you be reporting to me? What are the things that I care about? How do we figure out what are the things that we should pivot on? What are the things that we should throw out? When should we throw out the entire product and start all over again? But you know, that relationship between founder and board member is pretty sacred. You shouldn't just give it away. And so unless you feel compelled to do so, I wouldn't do so.
Yeah, we gave up a board seat for our seed round, and some of this might be semantics around whether you're doing a seed or what I would consider more of a pre-seed. If you're doing a convertible round for like $1 million or less, don't give up a board seat. If you're doing a price round for a few $1 million and the person leading that round wants a board seat, it is not uncommon in beauty. I know way more beauty founders than I know other founders. It is not uncommon in beauty if you raise a priced round for several $1 million for someone to expect a board seat at the end of that. So I think just know what's common, at least for your industry, so that you can understand if someone is making, you know, a standard request or not.
That makes a lot of sense. Someone asked, how, like, basically they want a tutorial on like what are the common terms in like a seed round. I think I want to mention that if you're doing a safe, YC has published safe notes that you can just find online and use those, and they are like clean to use. And then I think if you're doing a price round, or if someone is asking you for a safe, I mean, we have a little bit written in the guide, but I think if you have a lawyer that has done a lot of seed rounds, then they you can ask their advice reviewing like a term sheet. And I think also also just ask like some other founders that have raised to maybe take a look or ask about like certain key terms. I think it'll be hard for us to go through here, but I mean, you know, the main ones are for the safe would be like the cap and the discount. And we explain kind of the math of that in the guide. Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking at different questions. So someone also asked if they have just hundreds of dollars of revenue, like does that they said, does that count in revenue in terms of raising? But I think like maybe you can answer that, but also like adding to that, just how to communicate that traction when they're raising.
I think more exciting than hundreds of dollars of revenue is like even like interest. KJ was talking about referencing like Instagram followers or a list of people that are interested, or I don't know. I think investors are not going to be super excited about that figure, but showing interest or like insight, and Emery was talking about like this golden nugget of an insight. There's a lot of ways to get investors excited about your story. And being a great storyteller is just part of the pitch process. That doesn't have to hang on like a small revenue number.
Yeah, and I think there are also ways to couch certain things, like 1,000 people in and of itself signing up for an email list isn't a big number, but 1,000 people on a wait list in a month sounds a bit more impressive, right? Like I put this thing in the world and a month later I had 1,000 people on my wait list. So couching it in terms that make it clear, like there's a groundswell around this thing, I think can be helpful. And, frankly, sometimes you have to sort of finesse and massage these things. Like you've got to be a salesman, but I think there's a way to sort of like present something so that the groundswell of it is evident.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I think if just at the beginnings of revenue, like I had 2,000 a month in revenue during my seed round. And at first I made like a graph of like growth, like it was like, $200 and 400, like whatever. And then I got the feedback, like, it's just so small. Like, don't put it on a graph. It's just like not impressive looking. And I kind of changed it to more of like what KJ and Zara are talking about, just trying to show that like people want what we have. And I got rid of the chart and I just had a page that was like, I think the title was like customers want what we have. And I said more like, 100 people have like used it and like paid this much collectively. I think like when you're raising your A and stuff, you'll need to show like growth and stuff. But at the seed round, I think it's more about, do people actually want this? And are there signs of that? And less about the graph of like the really early numbers.
Yeah, I'll also say we had a slide, sorry to interrupt, but we had a slide around customer feedback, and the quotes that people gave about our products, like in reviews and online, weren't things like really great shade, like love this lipstick. They were things like, I have never had a beauty brand that made me feel seen before, right? So like if you have that sort of just like excitement around your brand and being able to show that, there are investors who get that. And to be clear, there are investors who don't, right? And who'll be like, I don't care, show me the numbers. But there are investors, particularly consumer investors, who are looking for that exact thing, that sort of intangible, like, oh, this brand has found a way to really connect in the hearts and lives of these people. I can from that map to what sort of brand this could be. So that's just another way when we didn't have a lot of revenue where we could show, yeah, but what we do have, like, are customers who are just like fanatical about us.
It also highlights like when you just said that quote, I felt like emotional. I got like a swell of emotion, and bringing that into the pitch, because investors are human and they will have those emotional reactions. And then also like highlighting, using emotion to highlight like founder company fit, or whatever you want to call it. But Anne-Marie's question, like, is this your life's work? Like really showing that you are passionate about it and that your customers kind of are passionate about it, because you're the right person to do it. Like those are, I think, more compelling things than small revenue numbers at this point.
Makes sense. Okay,
I was going to say that I think that you have to find the graph. My feeling as a founder was that like obviously don't pick a super random metric that doesn't actually mean anything for the business, but if you are building something that has got some kind of traction and it's going somewhere, you've got to find the metric that is growing, that is looking good within a certain like rate that shows that. I think like otherwise you're doing the raise off of the idea, which is like we've built something we can show we can execute as a team because it's out in the market. But then it makes me question, is it the right time for you to raise? If you don't have any metrics going up in your business, it's just much harder because you are fundraising off of an idea and a set of people. But I think even if you have got you know, you were saying like the rate of it, if you have got hundreds of dollars of revenue, well, if 3 weeks ago you had nothing, and in week 1 you had 50, and in week 2 you had 150, and in week 3 you've got 250, that's pretty cool. Like that is like a graph that works. But I would have an idea of digging in further numbers to be able to show growth, or like something that is gaining momentum or getting a bit of traction inside of the business.
Awesome. So we got another good question, which was, how do you know when you haven't found the right investors versus you just need to change your pitch?
I think if investors are giving you the same type of feedback when they're turning you down, always ask for feedback. Like look at it as a learning process. For sure, you're going to get no's because everyone gets no's, and it doesn't matter how good your business is. So know that up front. But when you get the no's, if you really look at them as a learning moment and ask for that feedback, if you're getting a pattern of feedback, then that's probably means it's not just about that investor, right? It's something about the way you're pitching or something about the way you've designed your business. And it's really important to build in time to kind of reflect and figure out, okay, what can I change in my pitch based on that pattern? And then if it's not a pattern, maybe they just don't get it. Mm-hmm. But also, you know, you can always learn, like, okay, why didn't they get it? What could I have done better? How could I have presented it better? Could I rearrange it? So I look at every no, whether it's the jerkiest investor, as an opportunity to learn.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it might be a not popular perspective. I think it's rare to an investor who is not the right investor. There are absolutely some like real assholes and bad eggs that exist out there, but there's not a huge volume of them, I think, because a lot of them get weeded out by the industry or by feedback or other places. I think the job as a founder fundraising, it's kind of like the ultimate salesperson. Like your role is to read this person and read this fund and be able to tell the story of your business in a way that is authentic, but also in the way that kind of sees the two coming together. In an ideal scenario, you're picking the best funds and they love you and it's all like matchy-matchy. But realistically, for me, I had to like really craft this message in the right way that actually did suit different people in a different way. And that is just what practice gives you, is understanding like, what is the background of this person? What's their location, size of the fund, previous investments? Like, what is it that universally everyone loves about our story that really like entices them and compels them to hear more? And then how is it going to land best? And you listen to these like really micro things of like, what questions are they asking? Like, okay, their fear is therefore around revenue, or their fear is around market size. And can I preempt that and actually answer it before they ask the question? So every time you're getting a no, most of the time it's because you've got to learn how to change or tweak or like make your pitch land better with everyone, basically.
And you know, one thing I'll just mention here is geez, I hate this computer. But you know, one thing that I don't know how to like really construct like the best feedback here, but what I've seen is that women, and I hate these generalizations, so I'm going to caveat this statement with that fact. But and I'm about to make a sweeping generalization. Women, and this is based on actually feedback I got today. So I'm in a firm, and I work with a partner, Mike Maples, obviously a guy, and we did a personality profile today. And he came back as a philosopher dreamer. So he's very high on innovation, very low on facts. So and I am very logical. Like, I'm super high on logic, very high on impatience. And there are like great assets that come along with that and great deficits. But what it really spoke to me about was, sometimes I have these conversations with Mike where I actually say to him, that doesn't even make sense. Like, the thing that you just said doesn't make sense. It sounds good. And in a tweet, like, it sounds amazing, but it doesn't make sense when you really think about it. But that is actually how he's marketing himself. And I see this a lot in Twitter. I see it in blog posts. I'll look at something and I'll say, that doesn't make sense, right? And I'm sure like a lot of women in this audience have had that moment. Like, they've seen probably a dude say something and they're like, that freaking doesn't make sense. Like, what you just said isn't even true, right? But it sounds good. And so I understand why you said it, but it doesn't sound good. And it pains me because, like, when I see investment pitches, there's that dichotomy. There's that like, some guy comes in and is saying stuff that is catnip for investors, but it doesn't even make sense. But like, the person on the other side is like, it's catnip. And the woman is saying stuff that totally makes and so I don't know, like, the advice, this is a piece where I don't know what to say to women, which is like, don't say things that don't make sense. But at the same time, like, there's a side of you that I want you to embrace, which is like, ride that line. Like, look at the stuff that people say that is extreme and it's category creating, and it almost doesn't make sense. And I struggle with this as an investor, because I don't know how to say something that doesn't fundamentally make sense. And yet I see people saying things that don't fulfill the whole logical chain, and then they get a lot of attention for it. And I've chosen the path of like continuing to make sense, but from a female founder's perspective, I've seen that be a liability. And I struggle with this because I don't know what the right advice is, and potentially the entrepreneurs here know what the right balance is, but that is the struggle, and I struggle against that as well in the venture capital side, but I assume that in the entrepreneurship side it's even more real.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I'm with you on, just things should make sense. I think a way to sort of bring that like brashness to the table when you are in a meeting with an investor is to just state what are essentially opinions as facts. Not all the time, not like, with no discernment whatsoever. But like, for instance, an opinion of mine in the beauty world is that in the future really starting now, women are going to expect that every single product in their makeup bag was made specifically for them. But I don't walk in a room and say like, I personally believe that in the future, like I walk into the room and say, in the future, right, women are going to expect that every single product was made for them. And that's why my brand is going to win, because I have made this product specifically for her. I didn't take some stock shade and sort of add some brown to it and assume like that's going to work on her brown skin. And so that to me is how I sort of try to do it. It's still logical, right? I'm basing it in logic, but I'm stating it as a fact. And that's sort of how I try to get around that, because I can't be someone out here just spouting off nonsense. Like that just is not my personality. And I think there are just a lot of men who are comfortable with that. I am not, but I can, and I've practiced at it, be confident in stating things that really truly are opinions as facts.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I think that what KJ just said about like, you have to be authentic to yourself. Like you don't want to go in and sort of try to copy somebody else, and because that's actually going to be really rub people the wrong way. So you need to find something that feels authentic to you, but is also, presenting this exciting vision for the future, and is very confident, because I think that investors determine their confidence in your business based on your confidence in your business. And if you come across like you're not super confident that it's going to be extremely successful, then they're not going to be either. So you need to, first of all, you need to get to a point where you are very confident. Like you shouldn't be like, I'm not confident, but I'm going to act like I'm confident in this meeting, because that's not going to go well. Like you need to do the work to get to the point where you are very confident, and then like really have it shine through. And you can think about like certain things that you're going to say, like KJ's thing is awesome of like, in the future, blah, 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 like whatever it is for your company, like say certain bold things like that, to really show people that you are confident and you know what you're talking about. Because investors want to feel like you are the expert and they're learning from you. Not like you're going in and being like, this is what I think, but what do you think? You're kind of like the investor expert person, which, believe it or not, I think people a lot of times do go into meetings with that perspective of like, I want to get advice. And that's, if you actually want to get advice, that's one thing. But if you're kind of like looking to pitch and like acting like that, that's not going to go over very well.
I think it should like speak from the passion of why you like remembering why you did start this, right? Like I knew it was shit being queer on straight dating apps. Like I hated being asked for threesomes, and that was real. Like it wasn't just me, it was my friends. It was like the whole experience. Like KJ had shit makeup products. Like we know that this is a problem because we do experience it. You've got to know it's big enough for everyone else. But that is the reason why you have given up any kind of job, started to do this like, virtually impossible thing, is because you know something to be true. And that is what you're trying to like deliver to them as it is true. It is true. You're just like saying it with like a bit more excitement and passion, and they might be used to hearing it.
Oh, and the other thing I want to say just on the question of how do you know when like it is the investor not with you, or is like your pitch bad or whatever. One thing that I found in my process was like investors like to invest in groups. I'm sure you've all seen this by now, right? Like they're more followers than leaders. Let's be honest. Like they want to know that they're in good company. There are other investors doing the cool thing. And so it has been my experience that like if it's a good idea, people will tell other people. So if you're pitching to a bunch of people and none of those people have told anyone else about your business, that is because they think it is a bad business. It's not because they just think like, I personally don't want to invest in this business because it doesn't fit in with my thesis or my portfolio. It's because they think it's like not a good business. So if you don't have anyone sharing your business with anyone else, it might just, kind of be a shitty business idea, or one that you just need to pivot on a bit or like tweak a bit. But if people are talking about it, even if they're not saying yes in the moment, that means like, I think this is interesting. I want to get like some other eyes on it, or I want to tell my person who does invest in this industry about it, like, because I don't know that much about it. It sounds interesting. Let me see what they think. Like, they're social, and they have to be because they're in the information gathering business. So if no one is telling anyone about your business, I would say that is a good indicator that there is something you need to change. And if people are talking about it, then you've probably got good on your hands, and it's just about tweaking the pitch as needed.
Yeah. Can I weigh in on tweaking the pitch as needed? I just want to share a story because I think it's I learned a lot from this experience that I had when fundraising. There was, when I first started our past round, our most recent one, I was getting a lot of no's up front and people weren't getting it. And I was like, what? They were talking about us like a toy company, and they were like kind of making toy company references. And I was like, guys, this is about like baby education. Like nobody's doing this, and I talked to a founder friend and I pitched her, and she was like, when you talk about it, I totally get it. And then I look at your deck and I just see like pictures of toys, even though babies learn through toys. Like investors like to, they're busy, they're making shortcuts. They like to put people in boxes very quickly. And so I just like revise the deck, and the deck should be like a living, breathing document that you revise after you get feedback, right? So I revised it and literally just took out the pictures of toys, and replaced them with like mommy baby, daddy baby having beautiful moments. And I stopped taking my physical product to meetings, and just like, didn't change my business at all, just like a slight tweak on how I was presenting it, and all of a sudden people were getting like this huge, like this can be a huge global, category defining thing. I think that's just a good illustrative example.
I think that's a great example of just hearing the feedback and then iterating, and it'll be different for everybody. So that's really awesome. And adding to the question about like, do you need to tweak versus are these just not the right investors? I think it is a numbers game. So like you need to talk to a lot of investors to find the right ones. Like I think Zara or KJ said this, like every founder's going to get no's, like, even like companies are doing just incredible numbers, they're going to get no's too. So you just have to kind of go into it being like, all right, I'm going to talk to a bunch, and it's like top of the funnel. Like some are going to say no after the first meeting, some are going to say no after that meeting. And like, you can't talk to like 5 investors, they all say no, and be like, oh, I don't have something. Like you need to talk to, 30, 40 people, to get a good sense of like the market for your company. We have a question, shifting gears a little bit, about solo founders and how do investors look at solo founders, if they're technical or if they're not technical. For people that have raised as solo founders, do you want to chime in? And then maybe Anne can chime in on how she thinks about it too.
Yeah. I think that there is less stigma around it than there used to be. I think at a seed stage, primarily the reason people want a team is because it's obviously super bloody hard to do this. And if you've got a team of people, that's more resources, more minds, like more like power working towards building this, and hopefully from like more experience and background. I think the way that I actually wasn't pushed on it that much. I definitely got some no's around it, but it wasn't a huge problem that I knew of anyway when I was fundraising, mainly because we were still executing. Like I had a team that I had built or that I was working, and we were able to still get stuff done. And I was very clear about like how responsibility was split up between the teams. Realistically, at the time, I still was doing like a lot of it, at least most of the thinking around a lot of the business. And I understand more now over time, like why that is a risk. But as long as you are able to have a good set of people who are still executing, I think that addresses a lot of the questions at a seed stage.
And do you want to chime in about how you think about solo founders coming to pitch you?
Yeah. So I think that the main reason that we've had problems with solo founders is that I think that having more than one founder allows you to have someone to push you when the going gets rough. And so when we look at the numbers and just the data, solo founders, and we've invested in a bunch of them, just don't perform as better as the sort of 2 to 3 founders that we've seen. and when I dive into why, I think the reason is there are multiple, there's not just one near-death experience, there's like 5 to 6 near-death experiences in any company's existence. And what I've seen that the co-founder's value is sort of being it's not even the support, it's sort of the second voice to why this opportunity is still a valid and important opportunity. And so it's sort of a support mechanism that I see is really critical. And at the end of the day, like I've had CEOs have significant emotional and mental issues as a result of the loneliness of being CEO. And I don't undercut like how hard that is. And I think just actually having someone who's been there from the beginning and who understands you as a human being, I can't oversell that. I can't tell you like what it does for the CEO, but also for the other co-founders, to have people who believed from the very beginning. So I don't know, like if you're a solo founder and that's the way you have to build the business, I've seen that work. So I don't want to undersell why that could work. But if you can find someone who can be a partner on the journey, I just think I've seen.
And you just. Or I unmuted you. I can actually do it on my side too.
But I can't tell you how valuable that is. And so I completely understand it's a luxury, right? But if you can have it, have it.
Yeah, I would chime in. I was a solo founder at first, and then I had a co-founder, and then she'd left, and then I got another co-founder. So I was a solo founder for about 8 months, and I wanted a co-founder. Like I was like co-founder dating, like meeting up with a bunch of people that could be potential fits, and I just didn't find the right person. Like I really wanted to, and I got really good advice from Brian Armstrong, who's the co-founder of Coinbase. He was a solo founder at first, and then got a co-founder, and he basically told me, he was like, just make progress and the right people will be attracted to what you're doing. And like, don't let it stop you from doing anything. And so that's what I did. So I raised like a pre-seed, I got some early customers, and then, my co-founder was attracted and like joined, then we ended up not having product market fit for a while. And then she left, and then, and then we pivoted, and then I got another one. But I guess like, I completely agree. Like, I think it would have been awesome to have one from the beginning and just have them all the way through. But also like, don't let that stop you. Cause I do see some people that are like just looking and looking and looking, and it stops them from getting started. And I think you like can get started and make some progress. And then it's even more interesting for somebody to join you as a co-founder once you've like made a little bit of progress and seem like an impressive co-founder for them to join. Okay. So someone asked about if they've been kind of bootstrapping for a couple of years and then they've reached a point where they're actually hitting better metrics and want to raise now. What are thoughts on doing that? I mean, I think, Anne, you kind of addressed this earlier with Qualtrics as an example of that. And I think that's totally fine. I think that's actually like a really good story of like, look, I was starting this and then it's like taking off like crazy. So now I need to raise money. Like, I think that will be a good story. I think if it's been like the same for 2 years, it's not as good. But if it's like you started it and all of a sudden it's like really taking off, and I think that would be good. Okay. A few people asked about how do investors feel about spouses as founders. Anne, do you want to answer that?
So having backed several spouses as founders, I would still do it. But I think there's a couple of things that you should be aware of. One, as much as a CEO will say that they're extraordinarily objective about evaluating their spouse as a employee, you are not. And I've never seen it be objective. I've never seen it be best in class and demanding of world-class performance. And so it's just something to be aware of. And so that function will not be best in class. And even if it is operating extraordinarily well, which I have also seen, the rest of the team will question whether or not it's best in class. And that in and of itself is going to be a problem. And so you need to figure out like how you're going to address those issues. I also think that you should trust your board in assessing that function. So I've had several cases where I've actually had a case where the spouse was actually performing extraordinarily well. And so in that case, I was like, let's keep going with this function. She was a sales executive. There have been other cases where I'm like, I'm not so sure. And if the investor has a track record of having backed spouses, then you may want to trust that instinct. Because every time I get pushback, every time it's sort of, you don't know what I see in this person, and trust me, like, I can tell you what is world-class performance. And if I'm not seeing it, then you should trust me on it. And that's a really hard conversation to have. And so, and every person who goes into it assumes that they're going to have incredible integrity, and they do have incredible integrity, but they're not objective. And that's the piece that I haven't been able to figure out how to traverse. And empathy for the founder, it's really hard.
I don't have a lot to add on this. I think I don't have that in my company, but I definitely have friends that do it. So it's not, and I've heard that some investors kind of don't like that, but others do. And so if you are already doing that, it will be possible for you to fundraise. So there's been some talk about like starting a Slack channel and everything, and definitely I see people are kind of aggregating to do that, and that's totally great. I'm also gonna help form WhatsApp groups by sector, and we'll take into account geography, and we might even email people a survey of how they want to be in touch. So feel free to kind of like do your own stuff, but we're also gonna try to facilitate some of that as well. Okay. Some people asked about remote teams and how investors think about if you're starting a company as a remote team.
I'll just chime in here. Like, I'm a huge fan of remote teams. I'm not scared of it. I've seen it, and I think you should take advantage of it.
Cool. It does seem like more and more companies are doing that. I've also heard of challenges. I haven't done it, but it seems like it's happening more for sure. Okay. Someone else talked about how to deal with, they called startup depression, and then there's been some other topics about, and we're going to have a session on kind of dealing with the roller coaster, but would love to hear this panel of entrepreneurs' thoughts on kind of like how they've managed the emotions of early stage startups.
I will share something. I think that it's, and especially as it relates to the fundraising process, because that can get extremely emotional. I mean, just working on a startup doesn't leave you much room in your life to take care of yourself. So that's hard. But then fundraising, like as people are turning you down, you can take it, it can get really, really personal, because as founders, we often like cut a lot of things out of our lives to make this happen. And when you're working that much on one thing, it starts to really feel like your whole identity. I'm a mom, so I have like that part of my life, which actually helps. But really, like if the business is doing well, I feel like I'm succeeding. And if the business is doing poorly, like for a while, I felt like a personal failure. And if I got turned down by investors, like I would just take it so hard because it felt like they were rejecting me because it's become my whole identity. And so one way to avoid that is really to make sure that you don't cut everything out of your life. Like you have, you have your identity as a friend, and you have your identity as like the person who likes to do the hobbies that you like to do, and just making sure that that you have time to be other things besides the founder and CEO of this company. And then to really understand that it is not your company and is not you. I think just like the thought process of that is helpful.
Yeah, I certainly have just in a lot of ways, a lot of times. I mean, Anne talked earlier about just like the loneliness of startup life, and I have a co-founder who's amazing, and it's still really lonely and it's still really anxiety inducing, and I've just fallen into these anxiety traps more times than I care to count. I think along with finding things outside of your company that you can do, I would also say like therapy is just one of those things I think everyone should do, and if you are able to do it, I strongly recommend. It's such a difficult journey. And actually what my co-founder and I did was we hired an executive coach, which is basically like business therapy. I sort of treat her like a therapist, but and we put that tab on Minted, right? So it's not coming out of my pocket. And by the way, she's not cheap, but Minted should pay for it because it matters that like I am well as a person, like that matters to the company. So we got an executive coach and we did that early. And then I also recently got a cat and helping a lot with my anxiety. But yeah, I just think like when you sort of bottle it all in, even if you have a co-founder, when it's just sort of the two of you, like just living in this anxiety all the time and you don't have an outlet for getting it out, it just can become really unhealthy really quickly.
I think for me, it was like being able to recognize your own patterns made a really big difference for me. Like I started to realize that when we had like a really big milestone or like a really big project, we've been working like something really big to ship, and then we've been working on for like 6 months or something in the worst instances, you finally ship it. I would then have a really low month after that. And the first few times it happened with these like big milestones, I didn't really like after I fundraised and closed around, and then had a massive dip underneath it. And it took me a while to recognize those were patterns for myself, to at least just know, okay, this is just like a phase that I'm in. I'm going to come out the other side. It just takes time to like find my next big, like, the next quarter, like roadmap planning, or the next like year's metrics that we're working towards to like help you out. And in the meantime, if most people are kind of like at least a bit more conscious about like self-care and what's good for them and figuring out what is good for you, and just taking like the odd, whether it's depending on what stage you're at and how you work and what's good for you, but like taking a weekend, and if you need to go to nature, do that. For me, I used to get super drunk, and that was my like really drunk, and then a full weekend of like TV and nothing else, being hungover. And it's not like, that's what suits me, and it would help like make me on Monday, I'd like have the worst like, what have I done, that I would like kick back into stuff really hard, and that kind of like motivated me to get going again. And from my friends, it's like go and get into nature and like touch the ocean. And for other people, it's like go buy a massage roller thing and like do face, it's like, find the thing that works for you in the meantime.
Yeah, for me, I I think like having friends that you talk to, ideally other founder friends, even better other female founder friends, that you can talk to about what you're going through. It's so nice to be like, oh my gosh, I'm going through this really hard thing. I just had an investor turn me down or whatnot. And someone be like, oh, I know, I had that happen too. And you're like, oh, okay, I'm not the only one. I'm not like the worst, whatever. So, and then it continues to happen. Like if, the first time you need to fire someone, like that's really hard. And like talking to other friends that have done that makes it so much better. And so I think having like a support system, ideally of people who've like been through it, is really, really nice. I'd also second the therapist coach. I have a coach and I did that really early on, and she's been like incredible for my emotional health. Yeah, and then similar to Robin, I just know the things that kind of restore me, and I've gotten good at identifying when I'm not in a good place, and then I just sort of like know the things that get me there. And it's like I like to paint my nails, and I like to like have a candle, get a good night's sleep, like talk to close friends or family. Like I just have like these things. Yeah, just like whatever it is for you, just like know those things. And it's so easy to like, because sometimes when you're in a bad place, you just want to like work harder, because like you might be in a bad place because you're overwhelmed, you have so much stuff to do. So it's so easy to be like, I don't have time to like take care of myself, and then you just like go deeper and deeper. But it's really important to pause, and get yourself to a good place first and foremost.
I like 1,000% agree with the founder friends. Like if you can, even if it's just one person to start with, but getting a group of people, and hopefully these WhatsApp groups will be that for you guys. But like, I remember the first time I was firing someone and being able to just like message a group of people being like, literally, what did you say? Like, can you give me a script for this? Which wasn't because I was going to use it, but like, I definitely did use bits of it, but was like, I just wanted to get that around my head. And you can read as much as you want online, but it's not the same as actually being able to like talk to a set of people about it. And like, this investor said this, does that sound right? Does it sound off? I'm going to try this. It's just this, like, it slightly combats that loneliness that people have been talking about a bunch.
Awesome. Okay. So, all right, maybe we'll squeeze in one last question. I love how everyone stayed so engaged and everyone stayed on, from the participants this whole time. And we'll squeeze in one last question. So I think this is a really good question, which is like, how can you get to product market fit when you're bootstrapping, you have little money to get users, you can't raise money because no one will invest in you pre-revenue. So it's sort of like a chicken and egg thing. There is a way. So what are people's thoughts on this?
So I'll go as the rapacious capitalist. You know, the thing that I would really love for founders to separate out is what I call product market fit. And the way I would categorize that is engagement versus growth. And I always tell our founders, hack value before you hack growth. And most of the founders that we look at, they're trying to do both, because and to be honest, that is the message that venture capitalists are giving founders. So it is completely on us. But I'm like reprogramming our founders on the fly. And the thing that I'm always telling them is, forget what we need to do for Series A financing. Okay, we're back. If I can help you figure out the value that you deliver to your customer, the 10x advantage that you have, and the customers who care about that advantage, then I can help you with growth. But 90% of the time, like my founders haven't figured out who is their best customer, what is my TEDx advantage, and why are my customers buying from me? And if you can figure that piece out, it may be a small niche, but you can grow from that niche, and you can grow profitably from that niche. And if you can grow profitably from that niche, then you have all the power in the world. And so, you know, you may be getting different advice from your VCs, but if you want advice that gives you more power, then I would say hack value before you hack growth.
I like that. I also think that, like, circling back to something KJ said earlier about like a wait list, like it doesn't have to be, you know, revenue and product market fit. Like, you want to show some signs that people want what you're doing. And it could be revenue. That's like, that would be amazing. But if like you don't have the money in order to get that, like, you know, get people to sign up for a wait list, get testimonials of people that say that they would buy it if it existed. Like, think of what are ways that somehow you can show investors that like people really want this. I'm really onto something. And there always is some way to do that. You just have to be creative and think about it.
I think it is an amazing concept, hack value before growth. To get to that value point just takes time. A lot of the time you need money to get to that time where you understand it. And to get the money to do it, it's rare that people, it's like you have to show something to start it. So I know this is what you're saying, you see, Anne, but I still think from like a founder side, the majority of investors, at least that I was speaking to, didn't have that mentality. Or if they did on the inside secretly, hopefully, they weren't giving me that impression like that was what they were looking for. So like as a founder, maintain that mentality and look for that, because long time down the road, once you've burnt a bit of money on growth or you've had your first bit of PR and then you actually don't have value and that growth turns into nothing, it is way better to run your business that way. But you also need to find something that looks like growth or traction, I guess, of some sort, whether it's waitlist or something to show attraction while you then get the money to then find the value to then later find more of the growth. It's like this chunky step thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, awesome. Well, I want to ask participants that are chatting here, you know, in thinking about the WhatsApp group, before you sign off, I'd love for you to put in the chat what you'd prefer to be matched based on, because I think we were thinking of either by sector or maybe by geography. So if you could put in like sector, geography, or like any other thoughts, we'll comb through that and then come up with the best way to match people. And then lastly, I just want to thank our panel so much. You all are so busy running your companies or running your fund, and really appreciate you taking the time to help the next generation of female founders raise a seed round and start a successful company. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, thank you guys.
All right, everyone have a good night. And then ladies, we'll see you next week for the second boot camp.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.